Good afternoon, everybody. The inquiry is now resumed. It's 2:30. I don't seem to have got a copy of your closings yet, Mr. White or Mr. Fraser. Have they been
Oh,
sent?
they have. They have. And
I know that
hopefully,
Holly is having major issues with her Wi-Fi today. So um, I don't know what to suggest. Maybe just crack on, and I will. Hopefully, it will come
one,
through at some point.
well, or the alternative, could we send it to Harvey to send on to you?
Yes, because Harvey has my email address. Yeah, let's do
Yes, and
Yeah.
I've
that.
already got it, so I'll forward that on to you now. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Harvey. This is coming very useful.
Mum, could we just wait for you to get it? Because obviously I want to, at the beginning, set out how Mr. Fraser and I are going to divvy it up. Unlike my learned friends, we're not going to leave a magical mystery tour as to the division of responsibilities, but set it out at the beginning. While you're waiting for that, Mum, can I make two matters in introduction, please?
Yeah.
And I do want to publicly state on the record a thank you to Gina and Harvey for the way they've helped us all over the past few weeks. I know I speak for all three parties that they've been incredibly helpful, and I will miss seeing Harvey run down the inquiry venue in the result of something going wrong. But he's certainly got his steps in.
I completely agree. Yes, they got chocolates off me on the last day of the physical event. So they were very, very helpful for us all. So yes, I
Yeah,
endorse those. Thanks. Okay, I've got them. Thank you very much, Harvey, for sending those through.
great. Well, as I can, if you can go to the first page, would you open it up and go to the first page, please?
Yeah, I am there.
Can you see, hopefully, unless Mr. Fraser's sent you an opinion in something else, do you have structure of the closing speech?
I do, yes.
Yes. Can I just, our intention is I'm going to deal with the introduction, the approach of the parties and Greenbelt. We're then going to, notwithstanding what's been said today, leave policy RUR4 as read. Mr. Fraser's going to then deal with the need and economic benefits. You'll then have my pleasure and my company for landscape and visual impacts. And Mr. Fraser's going to deal with highways and transport. We're going to leave residential amenity and other matters as read, and then I will conclude with the overall planning balance and conclusion. And as you can see, although what's been sent to you is 81 pages, the last 7 or 8 pages are appendices. And could I ask Mr. New to turn his camera off if possible?
I was just about to do that. So thank you,
That's
Mr.
right.
White.
And yes, what we've done, Ma'am, is I've set out, as you can see, hopefully this will assist you in relation to your decision notice. We've set out all the qualifications and experience for you for
Thank
your
you.
report. I don't know, would it also help? I don't know if Mr. Fraser sent the PDF or the Word, but would you like the advocates to send you the Word version as well as the PDF so you can take bits out, or are you happy to just have the PDF?
I've got word of yours and the council's. I haven't got a word of Miss Nevins, so I could do with a word version of that, please, if that's okay. She's nodding. Thank you.
I'll get that to you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, then, can I start off with the introduction, Ma'am? And it's not a surprise that as advocates for the appellants, we seek to say this is a truly special and game-changing proposal, as being reiterated every day of the inquiry. As you know probably better than anyone, inquiries have rhythms and trends, and this inquiry has been distinguished, we say, by every session showing what an incredible, powerful and transformative proposal this really is. What this inquiry has shown is that if planning permission is granted for the appeal scheme, it would be transformative for the British film and TV sector by providing the best studio facility in the UK, providing a brand new studio in an optimum location, providing a significant additional amount of new premium floor space, providing a massive economic boost by investing close to £1 billion, providing a massive economic boost by creating approximately 4,000 direct and indirect jobs, showing the world that the introduction of the grey belt concept is a meaningful and consequential policy change that allows green belt land to be used productively and properly, if three key purposes of the Greenbelt are not strongly harmed by the proposal. It provides a new leading training and skills academy to grow the future UK crew base and be a centre of excellence. It shows the world we're open for business, providing the best for the best. And lastly, it shows the world that the blockers and NIMBYs are not prevalent anymore in the planning system, and this government will no longer turn away incredible opportunities like this because of the views of a tiny number of vociferous and motivated doomsayers. Marlow Film Studios has the full support of the government's growth agenda, which recognises the creative industry as a priority sector. There's a demonstrable need for the appeal scheme if the UK is going to achieve the objective of growth by increasing its share of the global market for film and high-end TV production. And as we say, the appeal site is on Greybelt land in a sustainable location on the edge of Marlow. The scheme would therefore not be an appropriate development in the Greenbelt. The appeal site is also not the subject of any local or national landscape designations, and the appellant's landscape evidence has demonstrated the effect on openness, landscape character and visual effects will be largely localised to the site itself and the immediate surroundings. The scheme will not give rise to any severe impacts on the highway network or unacceptable impacts on highway safety. On the contrary, improvements proposed arising from the scheme will result in a significant betterment on the existing position by addressing a road traffic accident risk. Additionally, the bus services and cycling pedestrian upgrades will give rise to a genuine choice of transport modes for visitors. Safety issues arising from the HGVs reversing on the site will be easily managed, and therefore the council's highway-related reasons of refusal have therefore been comprehensively rebutted by the appellant. The concerns of the council and Rule 6 party about impacts of residential amenity, including noise, impacts on outlook and lighting, have also been addressed. For the reasons that we'll go on to address, the appellant's primary case is the proposal accords with the development plan and no material considerations would justify a departure from that plan. In the alternative, we submit the employment policies of the development plan are out of date, in particular providing little or frankly no support for the creative industries despite the crucial West London cluster, and policy RUR4 is out of date in allocating the wholly undeliverable Little Marlow Lakes Country Park. On either basis, ma'am, the council's original 9 reasons for refusal, which are now 8 in number following the withdrawal of reason of refusal, 8 are unwarranted. They were unjustified in May 24 when the scheme was refused, but they have been rendered even more unsupportable by the new national policy framework heralded by the NPPF. We submit in the strongest terms that any objective and reasonable planning balance in 2025, following the most up-to-date expression of government planning policy in that NPPF, should produce a balancing exercise in favour of the permission being granted. Can I just spend a moment on the approach of the parties? We take the view that the LPA has never fully acted reasonably in this matter. Indeed, the appellant's strong desire was to seek costs in this appeal, motivated by a genuine belief that the LPA has behaved poorly from the outset in its consideration of this proposal throughout its consideration by them. Additionally, as became clear in Mr. Fannon's, there's obviously some background noise of some kind. Someone's got a microphone on, which it would obviously be much better if it was switched off. Paragraph 16, ma'am. Do you want me to carry on or wait?
I think it's gone off.
I think it has.
Thank you.
Thank you. Additionally, as became clear in Mr. Fannon's cross-examination, there was no real attempt to carry out a proper and up-to-date fresh balancing exercise after the new NPPF was published in December 24, with its added emphasis on creative industries and the introduction of the concept of grey belt. Fundamentally, we say the LPA has never really grasped the profound benefits of the proposal and been negative and partial throughout. However, as the appellant has a long-term commitments to this proposal and wishes, if planning permission is granted, to get on to building out the permission as a matter of urgency, it will need the full cooperation of the LPA, and therefore the appellant has decided not to pursue an application for costs. But it's important to stress that it wants the Secretary of State to note that Bucks Council, in our view, is closed for business. There's no meaningful attempt to embrace economic growth whatsoever in this district. It pays nothing more than lip service to the growth agenda of this government and has failed to grapple with the concept of a forward-looking economy which remains open and competitive. Secondly, it sought to be obstructive, delaying and procrastinating throughout its consideration of this application, seeking to only put barriers and impediments to the consideration of the application. also completely resiled from its previous resolution of October 23, which clearly indicated that the members felt only two issues remained to be resolved, and by implication they could and would be resolved in their resolution by May 24. The imposition of 9 reasons of refusal subsequently represented a complete U-turn by its members. Fourthly, we say that this council does not treat its role as LPA in a manner which is reflective of up-to-date government planning policy. And lastly, it's also completely failing to produce an up-to-date development plan. Indeed, ma'am, the last point needs emphasis. The cornerstone, as you know better than anyone, of the planning system is the development plan. As we heard from Mr. Fannin, this LPA is doing absolutely nothing to get a new plan in place. The LDS is now 3 years old. Not 1 hour has been dedicated by the whole planning department of this council to update the LDS. Mr. Fannin, representing the LPA, could not answer the most rudimentary questions on the timetable of the new development plan and had to get an update from his policy colleagues. Overnight, what was produced had the clarity of mud, however, and there's clearly a non-existent commitment to a new up-to-date plan. This authority also has a parlours housing land supply position, as was stated by Mr. Sensible. And of course, notwithstanding what Mr. Bird said, we of course understand this isn't a housing proposal, but this is an authority with huge gaps in its development plan, for example, dealing with economic development, and has no policies, as Mr. Fannin accepted, expressly dealing with creative industries, and yet it is doing literally nothing to address these fundamental problems within its area. The harsh reality is the only way to get anything through the planning system in Bucks in 25 is by planning applications and appeals being made by developers. This is an LPA operating in a complete development plan vacuum, and the Secretary of State should be deeply alarmed by the utter indifference expressed at this inquiry by a major local planning authority. Then I want to say a few words about the Rule 6 party. Firstly, they represent one point of view alone of some local residents in opposing the proposal. Their support is nothing like as widespread as they would like to think. Indeed, the level of support for this project has been greater in terms of both letters written in relation to the application and by attendance at this inquiry. Their commitment to saving Marlowe's Greenbelt is nothing more than a slogan. Despite including submissions about the loss of Greenbelt, harm to the character and appearance of the area, and visual effects and overbearing impacts in their closing submissions, and of course in the evidence of Councillor Crabtree, they chose not to call any landscape or greenbelt evidence, and more remarkably chose not to ask one question of the appellant's witness on such matters, Mr. Jeremy Smith. Indeed, they weren't even here at the inquiry for that evidence. Similarly, Councillor Crabtree's evidence includes extensive concerns about parking and traffic impacts, and yet again, notwithstanding making reference in their closings, they did not attend for, let alone ask any questions about Mr. Dix's highway evidence. It is frankly not an acceptable, reasonable approach to make submissions on these matters without putting any questions to the relevant witnesses, even if covered by Rule 6 witnesses. And we say no weight can be fairly attributed to these submissions in those circumstances. We also say their case has been haphazard and illogical. They advocate that the proposal should be refused, and yet willingly acknowledge they offered no evidence on the planning balance. They also took a remarkably perverse approach in calling a witness solely to talk about a site many miles away in Pinewood. We say this approach is plainly balmy and utterly irrelevant to the matters that sit before you in relating to this proposal on this site. Frankly, of course, one cannot fault the commitment of Councillor Crabtree and Mr. Kershaw, but their views can only have weight if proper planning arguments which deserve weight are made, and we say their case has been characterised by planning arguments not supported by any professional evidence, and therefore their views can only carry limited, if any, weight in the planning balance. So could I then move on to the Greenbelt? And the first question, ma'am, for you to grapple with is whether it's appropriate development in the Greenbelt. And of course, we all acknowledge it is in the Greenbelt. And under national policy and policy DM42, inappropriate development requires very special circumstances, i.e. for the harm to be clearly outweighed and any other harm by other considerations. Any harm caused to the Greenbelt by inappropriate development is, of course, to be given substantial weight. Prior to 2 months ago, policy dictated that the appeal scheme was inappropriate development. However, as Mr. Sensible explained, the new MPPF published by the new Labour government in December 24 heralds the most significant relaxation in the restrictions placed on development in the Greenbelt since the Second World War. Under this new policy framework, The appellant contends that the appeal scheme now no longer constitutes inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. It therefore does not need to meet the very special test and substantial weight doesn't need to be given to any Greenbelt harm. Indeed, Para 155 of the NPPF provides that development of homes, commercial and other development in the Greenbelt should not be regarded as inappropriate where A, it would utilise grey belt land and would not fundamentally or undermine the purposes taken together of the remaining Greenbelt across the relevant plan period. B, there's a demonstrable unmet need for the type of development proposed. C, the development would be in a sustainable location. And D, it meets what is termed the golden rules. Of course, golden rules don't apply. Therefore, the only thing you need to deal with are the first three criteria. Let's deal with a grey belt. And as you're probably fed up of hearing, the grey belt glossary says in terms that it should be grey belt if the land does not strongly contribute to purposes A, B and D, but excludes land where the footnote 7 applies. This site is not covered by any of those designations. Therefore, the only question for you to grapple with is whether the land strongly contributes to purposes A, B and D. And you will know those. I won't read those out again. As set out in opening and as Mr. Sensical said to you, drew your attention to, there are 2 points of some significance about this definition in contrast with the July version. The first is contrary to that July version, purpose C is omitted from the list. Therefore, site can contribute strongly to assisting safeguarding the countryside from encroachment and still be grey belt. Secondly, there was also a different proposed definition of grey belt, which required there to be no more than a limited contribution to any of the purposes. In our view, as a matter of policy and interpretation, which is a question of law, there's a material difference between limited to not strong. The omission of purpose C and the change from limited to not strong is a clear signal that the government is even more eager to change the previous Greenbelt policy than was envisaged in the consultation draft. We consider that it's easier to demonstrate that a site does not perform strongly against free purposes when compared to demonstrating a site makes only a limited contribution to all purposes. Mr. Fannin noted the government's response to the consultation states the government's revised Greenbelt definition is intended to consider the development potential of land which no longer adequately serves the Greenbelt purposes. He applied, therefore, that the test should be whether the land adequately serves the purposes. That is completely wrong and amounts to the council trying to rewrite the deliberately high, strongly threshold in the definition of the grey belt. In any event, the very next sentence in the government's response states that our definition of grey belt will still make it clear that high-performing greenbelt land should be protected. This again emphasises the strong is a high threshold. To assess whether the appeal site contributes strongly to any of the three identified purposes, the appellant relies on the council's own greenbelt studies carried out by Arup, as well as the evidence of Mr. Smith and Mr. Sensical. It is of note that the local plan refers to the Arup studies as a very detailed and very thorough review of greenbelt across the whole county. This runs counter to the attempt by the council in this appeal to belittle or diminish the quality of the Arup studies by painting them as a high-level assessment or claiming that they lack the benefit of detailed evidence. The studies actually have the advantage of assessing the wide range of different sites across the 4 historic LPA areas and therefore being more objective than simply looking at one site in isolation. As you've heard, Ma'am, this assessment was carried out in 2 parts. In part 1, there was that following score. I won't read it out, but Arup explains that any area scoring 4 or 5 against the criteria was judged to meeting the purposes strongly. An area scoring 3 was judged to be medium, 1 or 2 weakly. Mr. Fannin ambitiously sought to suggest that strong in the Arup assessment does not mean strong in the NPPF grey belt definition, but we say this is clutching at straws. The government has settled on a test of strong performing greenbelt in the NPPF in full knowledge that up and down the country, greenbelt studies have used a scale similar to that of Arup. Methodologically, that's like a Choradorovitz, assessing the contribution of land to the specified purposes. There's no magic to the word strong, and clearly a finding by Arup of a contribution that is below strong is highly material to the assessment of whether land is grey belt for NPPF purposes. Mr. Fannin accepted that whatever strong means in the Arup study, the scoring by Arup of the site set out below represents a middle of the range score. Given the grey belt definition now, it is Arup scores 1 to 5 against individual purposes which matter rather than the overall summary. Mr. Vannon's focus on whether the Greenbelt studies recommended release of the site from the Greenbelt, a theme also in the council's closing, is a complete and utter red herring. Greenbelt release is a different question to whether some land is performing strongly against the purposes. As you know, in the first study, the site falls within general area 60. This area scored 3 against purpose A, 5 against purpose B, and 2 against purpose C, and 0 against purpose D. Because of the methodology, the score of 5 against a single purpose led to an overall scoring of strong. But as Mr. Sensical and Mr. Smith explained, it is really understandable why general area 60 scored 5 against purpose B. Of course, that's the merging of towns. Arup explained a score of 5 means the parcel constitutes an essential gap between non-Greenbelt settlements, where development would significantly visually or physically reduce the perceived or actual distance between them. The parcel comprises some 293.5 hectares and extends the full distance between Marlow and Bourne End. It would self-end evidently score 5. By contrast, the appeal site extends to 36 hectares, around a tenth of the general area assessed as 60. Furthermore, as shown in figure 1 of the Greenbelt Statement of Common Ground, which overlays the site against general area 60, the site is tight up against the A404 and the edge of settlement at Marlow, as opposed to being in the middle of general area 60. Therefore, even if general area 60 scores 5 on purpose B, the same cannot be said for the appeal site. It occupies a 12% fraction of the area and contains and is surrounded by various built structures. We say the development would not in any sense merge Marlow and Bourne End into one another, or result in significant visual or physical reduction of the perceived or actual distance between them. It's noteworthy, and you might well recall this from the first week, my cross-examination of Mr. Kennett, where he readily accepted there'd be no actual or perceived coalescence in his cross-examination, and that was in the context of DM32. The development, comprising only 22% of the existing separation distance, would instead leave a clear and significant gap of more than 3/4 of the land that exists between the two settlements. Then we move on to part 2 of the Arup work in 2017, and a parcel comprising the northern part of the appeal site, i.e. plots 1, 2 and 3, was assessed. It's notable that plots 1, 2 and 3 are plainly where the main built form of the appeal scheme are proposed. Same methodology deployed. Parcel BL0001 scored 3 against purposes A, B and C and 0 against purpose D. Again, it therefore scored moderately overall. Although the parcel was not taken forward for Greenbelt release, the important point for present purposes is that according to Arup, the parcel neither scored strongly or even relatively strongly against any purpose. And Mr. Sensical and Mr. Smith explain in their evidence how even this appraisal of moderate performance is overly optimistic. Therefore, on any view, the site falls short of making a strong contribution to any of the purposes. Therefore, taking the 3 Greenbelt purposes in turn, we say in relation to A, the Arup study adopts a simple definition of sprawl as the outward spread of a large built-up area at its periphery in an untidy or regular way. It follows from that the key issue when considering sprawl will be the strength of the new boundaries once the proposed development is in place. That's also reflected in the terms of Arup's assessment criteria 1B for purpose 1, i.e. whether the land prevents the outward sprawl of a large built-up area into open land and serves as a barrier at the edge of a large built-up area in the absence of another durable boundary. In other words, if the new development into the Greenbelt will itself have good definable new boundaries, this reduces the element of sprawl, as Mr. Smith explained. But the importance of boundaries is also inherent in the use of the word unrestricted. He also went on to say the resulting development would maintain clear boundaries to the north, the east and south, all clear definable boundaries with recognisable physical features. And if you look on a map and see those boundaries and look at what they contain, they're boundaries that square off an area of quite a lot of built form already, with the Westthorpe House, the park and the Crown Plaza, together with historic landfills influenced by noise and light. Beyond those boundaries to the east, south and north, the land is distinctly more open and rural. Therefore, we say that the appeal site doesn't contribute strongly to this purpose at all, let alone contribute strongly. Even on the council's own Arup assessments, the score for the whole of area 60, a smaller parcel 2, is only 3 out of 5, i.e. moderate. In relation to B, on neighbouring towns merging, we take the view that rely on the analysis again from Arab, and as Mr. Smith explained, with the development in place, there would remain 630 metres between the eastern edge of the site and the western edge of Little Marlow. The more open rural land outside of the site is more effective at performing this greenbelt function rather than that already more developed area comprising the appeal site. This is reflected in the Part 2 Arab assessment, which states that the remaining open areas are cumulatively important in maintaining the separation between Marlow and Bourne End and between Marlow and Little Marlow. Mr. Kennett indeed accepted during cross-examination that applying policy 32 criteria 4 that the development would not individually or cumulatively result in the actual or perceived coalition of settlements. And contrary to what Mr. Bird said in his closing at para 30, this concession was completely properly within the ambit of his evidence. And it also wasn't, I wasn't asking about the Greenbelt, Ma'am, you'll remember that. I was asking about compliance or not with policy DM32, which is not our policy, it's the council's policy on landscape. Mr. Fannin was forced in his evidence to disagree with the council's own landscape witness and reach a different view, and remarkably said only limited weight should be given to his colleague, which was deeply unattractive. However, taking all the analysis above together, we suggest that the site only performs weakly against this function. Then purpose D, to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns, it's common ground the site does not contribute at all to this purpose. And also explaining why the appeal site constitutes grey belt, the agreed position is that the development would not fundamentally undermine the function of the green belt across the plan area as a whole, for the purposes of para 155A. Then B, in relation to unmet need, we will obviously address that, but we do say our need witnesses have satisfied that test for the reasons we'll deal with in a moment, and the same with sustainable location, which we'll deal with in a moment. Therefore, on inappropriate development, we say that the appeal scheme does meet criteria A to C, and we do establish that the scheme is not inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. Indeed, we say this proposal falls utterly within what the government envisaged and envisages in creating the new category of grey belt land. There's no further or separate requirement to demonstrate the absence of alternative sites outside the green belt for the proposed development, and it follows that the scheme would comply with policy DM42 of the local plan and the MPPS chapter on the green belt. Can I just deal with the effect on openness and purposes? Even if the development is appropriate, any harm to the green belt will need to be weighed in the planning balance. The two differences from inappropriate development are there's no definitional harm by reason of inappropriateness, and secondly, the greenbelt harm is not to be given substantial weight. And Ma'am, you'll remember the debate we had about footnote 55. Harm to the greenbelt can be split into two categories. Harm to openness. You've had evidence from Mr. Smith and Mr. Sensible in respect of the impacts of the scheme on the openness from both a spatial and visual perspective. With a scheme of this inherent nature and scale, there's no getting around the fact that the scheme will result in significant harm in both spatial and visual terms. However, both aspects will be largely limited to the appeal site and the land immediately adjacent to it. Mr. Smith notes that while the appeal site is largely free from built form, it is influenced by built form and also urban activity in the form of lighting and noise. Thirdly, the ARAP Part 2 assessment found that the sporadic development in GA60 results in an overall semi-urban character with a clear sense of proximity to Marlow and the associated road network, and there will only be limited harm to openness in a visual sense from long-distance views of the site. In terms of purposes, our evidence sets out the following harm by reason to the greenbelt purposes is relation to A, by virtue of the existing landscape features, the definitive and well-established eastern boundary and the adjacent land uses, we say will not create unrestricted sprawl and should get a score of 0 out of 5. In relation to P, to B, not P, B, we say due to the adjacent land uses and the remaining extent of physical separation between the settlements, the site performs only weakly against this function, 1 out of 5. In relation to C, there will be some encroachment in the countryside, but with definable barriers against further encroachment, and it's relevant to know that ARAP in Part 2 scored the parcel 3 out of 5 and highlights the nearby urban influences and resulting semi-urban character. No conflict with D. Finally, E. Based on the specific site requirements in this site for a development of this nature and scale, it would be inappropriate or unfeasible in an open urban location. No conflict. Do you remember I asked Mr. Fannin about the prospects of finding an urban site? Mr. Fannin's approach was seeking to disaggregate the development of the appeal site we say is unsustainable. The scheme needs circa 36 hectares, and he accepted he's not aware of any urban location which could accommodate a site of this scale, or even anything approaching it. The critical mass of the appeal site, as covered below, is the subject of evidence by Miss Ellie Evans, who explained the economies of scale involved in a film studios of this magnitude. Even assuming disaggregation, the council has done nothing to demonstrate alternative sites. The council's whole case on this purpose is inconsistent with other parts of their argument. For example, if they're suggesting a film studios could be in an urban location, that will obviously have obvious traffic and residential amenity implications. But we say overall, for a scheme of this nature, it is inevitable that there will be significant impacts on the openness of the greenbelt. However, it is remarkable in this case that the conflict with the greenbelt purposes is relatively limited, and crucially, none of this harm is to be given substantial weight in the planning balance, and none of it results in conflict, we say, with national or local greenbelt policy. So now, Mum, could I ask you to skip over RUR4 and then take up page 19, and Mr. Fraser will read section 5.
So starting on page 19, section 5, the need and economic benefits case, we'll start with national planning policy. One of the three overarching objectives of the planning system is to help build a strong, responsive and competitive economy by ensuring that sufficient land of the right types is available in the right places and at the right time to support growth, innovation and improved productivity. Chapter 6 of the framework is concerned with building a strong, competitive economy. Paragraph 85 provides that planning policies and decisions should help create the conditions in which businesses can invest, expand and adapt. In other words, the planning system needs to facilitate growth. The same paragraph provides that significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, taking into account both local business needs and wider opportunities for development. This is consistent with the agreed attribution of at least significant weight to the economic benefits of the scheme. Secondly, the approach should allow each area to build on its strengths, counter any weaknesses and address the challenges of the future. The strength of the West London cluster is the film industry, and policy is injuncting us to build this strength to meet future challenges. Thirdly, this is particularly important where Britain can be a global leader in driving innovation and in areas with high levels of productivity, which should be able to capitalise on their performance and potential. And it is not disputed that Britain is among the global leaders in the film industry, and we need to capitalise on the West London cluster having a high level of productivity and enable it to realise further potential for growth. Paragraph 86A then requires planning policies to set out a clear economic vision and strategy which positively and proactively encourages sustainable economic growth, having regard to the national industrial strategy. The task is to be proactive and get on the front foot rather than reacting only when it is too late. The National Industrial Strategy, as we know from footnote 43, is Invest 2035, the UK's modern industrial strategy, which we will cover below. Paragraph 86C requires particular regard to be paid to facilitating development to meet the needs of a modern economy, which plainly includes the creative industries. Paragraph 87A provides that planning policies and decisions should recognise and address the specific locational requirements of different sectors, which includes making provision for clusters of creative industries and for new, expanded or upgraded facilities and infrastructure that are needed to support the growth of these industries. The unparalleled creative industry cluster is the West London cluster, and making provision for can only mean in planning decision making, granting planning permission. The question of need is not determined by what is required to meet the existing UK share of the growth of the global film and TV market, but rather what is needed to support the growth of that share. This is very important for considering the need evidence in this case. It is also important for how to interpret the requirement in paragraph 155B that there be a demonstrable unmet need for the type of development proposed. The council's interpretation is that this is referring to an existing or current need rather than any future need. This is wholly unsustainable in the context of NPPF paragraphs 86 and 87, which speak of the imperative to be proactive in encouraging growth and of making provision for facilities that are needed to support the growth of the creative industries. It is also unsustainable when one looks at footnote 56 of the framework, which indicates that a demonstrable unmet need in the housing context is where a 5-year supply projected forwards is not identified. Put another way, it would be wholly illogical for the government to fix the question of need to the existing position if it wishes to fulfil the obvious growth ambitions in the framework 85 to 87. Instead, the question asked by paragraph 155b is whether, in order to achieve the UK's ambition to grow the UK's market share of the global market for film and TV production, a need for Marlowe Film Studios can be demonstrated. As an aside, it is nonsensical for the Council to suggest, as they do at paragraph 33 of their closing, that proposals seeking to meet future need rather than existing need should be, quote, pursued through the development plan process. First, paragraphs 85 and 87 apply to both planning policies and decisions. Secondly, the Council's suggestion to meet future unmet need through the development plan process does not sit well with the Council's own lamentable record in plan making. The Council's nebulous suggestion that these revised paragraphs 85 to 87 of the framework should be, quote, understood in the context of the document as a whole is a misplaced attempt to diminish the significance of these paragraphs in this government's economic strategy. Turning to the National Industrial Strategy, as referred to above, the framework explicitly requires regard to be had to it. In the foreword, the Chancellor of the Exchequer confirms that growth is the #1 mission of this government, and the new industrial strategy is central to that mission. The foreword also speaks of a rapid change in the global economy and says it is time for governments to roll up their sleeves and shape markets rather than step back in the face of these challenges. This again is seeking an ambitious, proactive approach, which is the key context through which to assess the need for and benefits of the appeal scheme. The industrial strategy has a 10-year timescale and seeks to not repeat the mistakes of the past, which in the film industry is typified by the situation in the mid-2010s, when the rising demand for studio space resulted in as many as 23 blockbusters in 2015 to 2017 going elsewhere than the UK. One of the barriers to investment identified by the industrial strategy is identified as planning. And in the section headed Creating a Pro-Business Environment, it states, an effective planning system is a fundamental enabler for business investment in our growth-driving sectors, and at the national and regional level, planning constraints hold back growth. One of the government's priority sectors for growth and support, otherwise referred to as a growth-driving sector, is the creative industries. The industrial strategy states that the UK's creative industries are world-leading, showcasing the best of its creativity and culture to the world. I'll pass over the remaining non-emboldened text. The sector is expected to grow worldwide, creating further growth opportunities. And finally, to enable growth in the sector, the government will leverage UK creative industries' global comparative advantages. National policy in both the NPPF and the industrial strategy are, in the strongest possible terms, endorsing the need for growth of the creative industries sector as an economic priority. As Mr. Sensical explained, the new national policy and strategy is a step change, and such a policy would only be so stated if the government identifies a need for new film studio development. There would be no purpose to such a policy in the absence of a demonstrable need. The position in government policy is therefore predicated on the existence of such a need. The National Industrial Strategy is also reflected in a speech by the Chancellor on the 29th of January 2025, in which she vowed to go further and faster to kickstart economic growth, as well as in the announcement made by the Chancellor on the 16th of February that film studios are to receive business rates relief over the next 9 years as the government rolls out a reduction in business rates bills to help drive growth and deliver the plan for change. The Chancellor stated in her speech that we will continue to build the film and TV sector into a global beacon of homegrown business, creating more jobs, more investment. The Deputy CEO of the BFI added, our film and TV industries continue to be a powerful and vital growth industry. And the chair of BAFTA said it is vital that the UK remains competitive as a prospect for inward investment. Although the Council have sought to describe the National Industrial Strategy as inchoate on account of it being a green paper, and alleged that the question of need is deferred to a later stage, there is no evidence for this, and it runs contrary to other statements referred to above. It is inconceivable that the government would have identified the various priority sectors for growth without it being a clear objective to grow these industries. The Council's attempt to belittle the significance of the government's national industrial strategy and ignore multiple clear statements of intent by this government is consistent with their general approach of rejecting the direction of travel and support in national policy. The case of the Council and the Rule 6 parties on need is diametrically opposed to the government's recent and resounding expression of national policy in the industrial strategy and the framework. It is illuminating that the Rule 6 parties have spent most of their closing submissions on need, but without referencing either paragraphs 85 to 87 of the framework or the National Industrial Strategy. Both the Council and the Rule 6 implicitly launch a direct challenge to the correctness of the government's policy position. They effectively argue that the government's planning policy and industrial strategy was, quote, out of date at the point of adoption in December 2024 and October 2024, respectively, and that is not a tenable position. Local industrial strategy. The Council's case is also contrary to their own local strategy for economic growth. There is a local priority to support long-term economic growth for Buckinghamshire through investment in its key growth sectors. Buckinghamshire identify 4 growing super strength national and internationally significant clusters, including the creative and digital industry. In their consultation response on the new NPPF, the Council suggested it would be helpful to recognise potential for support for film and media. The Council's own report notes that the future success of the film and TV sector is linked to the continuing growth of the West London cluster. The Council and Rule 6 party need case. The Council's position as to the lack of need for the appeal scheme is premised on 2 points. Firstly, the existing pipeline of studio space will be sufficient to meet demand, at least in the medium term, because there are extant unimplemented consents for comparable scale studio development. And secondly, there is continuing uncertainty over future market demand. Similarly, the Rule 6 party's case is that there is no clear or pressing need for the appeal scheme due to an oversupply for substitutable studio capacity. Secondly, there is no evidence that the appeal scheme would result in an increase in the UK film and HETV production activity. Thirdly, the West London cluster has no significant advantages over the wider London and South East cluster. And finally, the extent to which the education and training programme would reduce the shortage of workers within the film and HETV production industry will not be significant due to its small scale. The appellant will rebut these positions with the following structured submissions. Firstly, the history of global growth in the film and TV industry. Secondly, the current global addressable market. Thirdly, forecasting global growth. Then the UK's past record of growth, the UK's current position in the addressable market, opportunities for the UK in future, the existing supply, the pipeline supply, matching supply to demand, the skills shortage, the West London cluster, why there is a need for Marlow Film Studios, the issue of displacement and additionality, economic benefits, and then finally conclusion. Before commencing these 15 submissions, we must comment on the comparative expertise backing the evidence of the 3 main parties. On the one hand, the appellant has called 5 witnesses of unquestionable expertise on matters pertaining to the film industry and economic benefits. By contrast, the Council has relied on the evidence of their planning witness, and the Rule 6 parties need evidence is articulated by Mr. Kershaw, a local resident who has no relevant expertise regarding the film industry. A history of global growth. The value of the global entertainment and media sector has grown from $2.39 trillion in 2019 to $2.83 trillion in 2024. The global revenue in the film and TV market specifically expanded during the same time period by $74 billion to reach $882 billion in 2023, notwithstanding the fact that the global cinema market was still in a period of long-term recovery from the pandemic. This increase has been driven by the rapid rise of the global over-the-top or OTT video market, which includes subscription video on demand and transaction video on demand services. This market grew at an annual average rate of 21.6% between 2019 and 2023, more than doubling in size over the period. These global revenues provide the revenue base for spending on the production of film and TV content, which is of most relevance to the assessment of the demand for studio space. The global spend on film and TV content has grown from $148 billion in 2015 to $243 billion in 2023. This pattern of growth is also reflected in the global content spend of the 6 largest providers, which enjoy roughly half of the market between them. It is further reflected in the growth of subscribers to SVOD services. The leading global SVOD service, Netflix, has grown from 36 million subscribers in 2013 to 273 million subscribers in early 2024, enjoying massive growth in operating revenue and income. Indeed, global SVOD revenue has increased from 17 billion in 2016 to 107 billion in 2023. Turning to the current global addressable market, as Mr. Chodorovitz explained, global spending on film and television production represents the key addressable market that generates the downstream demand for film and TV space globally and in the UK. However, when considering that demand, it is the spending by global media companies, notably the SVOD services, which underpins demand and provides the basis for ongoing growth. It is spending on original film and TV content that is most likely, albeit not exclusively, to generate demand for studio stage space. And the top 6 spenders are estimated to have spent $6.25 billion on original content in 2024. Once one adds Apple and YouTube, Mr. Chodorovitz concludes that the global addressable market, that is the market for the production of original film and TV content that can be made anywhere in the world, is currently worth at least $70 billion or 55 billion pounds. A forecast of global growth. The past and present record of growth is not forecast to stop. It is no surprise to see the creative industries identified as a priority growth area in the UK when one considers the evidence of global growth forecasts presented in the work of Mr. Chodorovitz, namely, firstly, a nearly $3 trillion total revenue for the global entertainment and media sector in 2024 is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 3.9%, reaching 3.42 trillion by 2028. Secondly, strong growth in the OTT market, underpinned by growth in the SVOD services, combined with the continued recovery and growth of the global cinema market, which will likely allow the global film and TV market to expand by over 25% between 2023 and 2029. There is, thirdly, a general consensus among forecasters that revenue growth in the OTT market will average at approximately 4% per annum in real terms to 2028. Fourth, assuming that content spending grows at the same rate as market revenue, i.e. 4%, then spending on original content is likely to reach just under £70 billion by 2030. This would add £15 billion in annual spending to the global market by 2030. And even if spending on original content grew at half the rate of market revenue, i.e. 2%, then 55 billion in average spending on original content would reach 62 billion pounds in real terms by 2030, i.e. adding 7 billion to the market. And then across all SVOD services globally, the subscriber base is likely to expand by 22.8% between 2023 and 2029, adding 332 million new subscribers to the current base of 1.458 billion subscribers. Then zooming into the UK, the past record of growth, the globalization of film and TV production away from Southern California has seen the UK become a major player in the global market. With an internationally recognized and long-established history of film production, coupled with the English language and the introduction of tax incentives, inward investment in film and TV production in the UK significantly outpaced the global rate of growth in content spend. The tax regime is itself a clear expression of government policy to support and grow the industry, quite apart from the framework and the National Industrial Strategy. And while filming days in LA declined at an average annual rate of 9.5% between 2018 and 2023, spending on film and TV production in the UK rose at an average annual rate of 3.5% during the same period. Between 2004 and 2013, film and HETV production in the UK totaled 9.8 billion. In 2014 to 2023, it reached 35.8 billion, or 3.6 times the prior decade. Over the last decade, spending on film and TV production has more than doubled. So looking now at the UK's current position in the addressable market, Ms. Neville explained that it is difficult to underestimate how strong the UK is as one of the most important filmmaking hubs in the world. And Mr. Chodorovitz noted that the theatrical release film market offers the best evidence of the UK's leadership, with analysis indicating that in relation to production of theatrical release films distributed in 2022 or 2023, the UK was second only to LA. The UK was also named by Netflix as our most important production hub outside North America, and that they have a long-term commitment to Britain's creative sector. Film and TV production spend in the UK hit a peak of 7.1 billion in 2022 before the film and TV production sector experienced labour disruptions in 2023 due to the Hollywood actors and writers strikes. This led to lower levels of production in the UK in 2023. However, production bounced back in 2024, with the BFI recording film and high-end TV production spend in the UK at 55.6 billion, a 31% increase on 2023 and ahead of the 2019 pre-COVID production spend. High-end TV production reached almost 3.4 billion, an increase of 20% on 2023, and the third highest annual spend since the tax relief was introduced in 2013. It was surprising for the Council and Rule 6 to question the bounce back when 2024 is the third highest year ever for film and HETV production spending in the UK. Ms. Neville's assessment is that the sector is thriving on every front. The BFI Chief Executive, Mr. Ben Roberts, said on the 6th of February, the UK's film and TV industries continue to be a powerhouse for creativity, investment and jobs. After a disrupted 2023, including the impact of US strikes, production spend rebounded to 5.6 billion, demonstrating the UK's strength as a world-leading destination for filmmaking. And the Council, in a note submitted by Mr. Fannin on the 13th of February, attempted to suggest that the BFI's latest statistical release harms the appellant's case because the figure is below that which had been previously projected, and further reduces the projection of future production spend in the UK by Knight Frank. However, this contention has been comprehensively rebutted by Mr. Chodorovitz in his own note dated the 14th of February for the four key reasons. Firstly, the latest BFI figures for production spend in 2024 are provisional and could increase as more information becomes known. The BFI press release itself states, as more budget information becomes available for some productions made last year, it is possible that inward investment spend will reach the highest level over the past 5 years. Past releases have consistently been increased subsequently. Secondly, a proportion of the production spending in 2024 will have been recorded in 2023 due to the accounting method. Thirdly, the overall figure for 2024 was dragged down by a disproportionately weak domestic film and HETV production segment. And finally, the forecast of demand for stage space that's presented by Knight Frank assumes no allowance for the UK increasing their share of the global market. Instead, it assumes that the UK market will grow at the same rate as the overall market. As explained below, a big part of Mr. Chodorowitz's evidence is to highlight the anticipated increase in global market share. With these points factored in, Mr. Chodorowicz confirms his expectation that the Knight Frank projection would actually be exceeded, thereby undermining the Council's position. The Council's case also fails to take any account of the undisputed quality of the offer by Marlowe Film Studios and what it can achieve as a catalyst for attracting a bigger share of the global market to the UK. The Rule 6 closing only selectively considers the response of Mr. Chodorowicz to Mr. Fannin's note. Furthermore, To dismiss the careful and considered evidence of Mr. Chodorovets as wishful speculation is regrettable and unwarranted. The Council's response in closing is similarly selective and does not make any real attempt to contest his evidence, instead making a separate point about existing studio space, which was not the purpose of Mr. Chodorovets's note. Trade press reports indicate that the UK is poised for a bumper 2025 in terms of film and television production, and Ms. Samantha Waite's clear evidence from her direct experience as a film and TV producer on the ground right now, contacting UK studios, indicates considerable difficulty in securing studio space in 2025. She explained that she had been approached by 6 producers to find UK studio space since December 2024, and that over the 2 weeks prior to her evidence, she had been contacting all the Grade A and larger Grade B stages in the West London cluster and wider South East, finding them to be oversubscribed already, whether due to major leases or prior bookings via the pencil system, with no reliable availability beyond March. She considers that the pre-strike scramble for stage space is coming back, with the potential collapse of the pipeline, see below, a real worry. The suggestion of the Council and the Rule 6 parties of ample slack in existing capacity is simply not consistent with the real-world evidence. The Rule 6's closing statement at paragraph 64 and also 83 alleges that there is no evidence of production companies struggling to find space. They were clearly not listening to the evidence of Miss Waite, or perhaps they were listening but decided it was not convenient to their case. Turning to opportunities for the UK in future, after noting the UK's strength as a world-leading destination on current figures, the BFI chief executive also considered the future. At the same time, we know these figures don't tell the whole story. What happens next will be crucial. Continued investment in skills and infrastructure, alongside strong government support, is essential to ensuring the UK remains a magnet for international productions while strengthening our independent sector for the future. Mr. Wootton, Chief Executive of the British Film Commission, similarly stated that 2024 was a transitional year. Looking forward, we're cautiously optimistic. The British Film Commission is experiencing the highest level of inward investment production inquiries for many years. The UK remains well placed to see a competitive share of the global production spend, and all signs are that we'll see strong growth in film and HETV in the coming months. Similarly, the industry itself is committed to future production in the UK, as Mr. King, Senior Director of Public Policy at Netflix, told the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee in May 2024, "We've put down very deep roots here, and we are certainly committed for the long term. The attractiveness of UK content in the UK as a global destination for production is every bit as strong as it has ever been. My message to policymakers today would be to think hard about the industry that we want to have in 10 years' time, not just the one we have today. And in particular, we need to keep a very keen eye on other markets to ensure that we retain our competitive edge." Optimism for the UK's future is also recognised by the Council's own need consultants, LSH. In their update report, dated the 20th December 2024, they state, "Despite the uncertainty, we are optimistic about the prospects for a recovery in 2025, with anecdotal feedback from most studios reporting strong bookings well in advance. We are also very positive about the prospects for the UK to increase their share of global production spend as US productions corporate increasingly look to offshore production activity." Chiming with LSH being very positive, Mr. Chodorovets's opinion is that, firstly, the increasing global nature and contestability of the film and TV production market is positive for the UK going forward. It means that the UK can compete for the estimated growth from 55 billion to 70 billion in annual global spending on original film and TV production by 2030. In other words, the addressable market in which the UK can compete is 7 to 10 times larger than the peak level of film and HETV production recorded in the UK in 2022. The UK could position itself to compete for a reasonable share of the forecast 7 to 15 billion pounds of growth in global spending on original film and TV production by 2030. The UK is well placed to compete for such a share on account of a range of factors considered by Mr. Chodorovets in detail, financial incentives, the exchange rate, competitive wages, the English language, regulatory advantages, proactive skills and development environment, and commitment to addressing the forecast labour market shortages. Any suggestion of long-term detrimental impacts to the UK from the shocks of 2023 in the light of 2024 figures needs to be treated with real scepticism, most particularly in a context in which the new Labour government has doubled down on commitments to supporting the screen sector as a key plank of growth in its developing industrial strategy. This position was echoed by Ms Neville, who explained that US producers will be looking to the UK in future years to see what the landing ground might be. A bigger market share for the UK is waiting to be realised. Looking next at supply, the existing position, against the backdrop set out above of demand forecasts, it is necessary to consider the existing supply, followed by the pipeline of potential future supply. The total stock of UK stage space is 7.55 million square feet, and of that 5.63 million is in London, the South East and the East, i.e. 74%. The appellant's need witnesses have all spoken of the importance of high quality studio space for attracting a greater share of global market demand, and in particular the top budget productions. In addition, the appeal scheme is accepted by all at the inquiry to be best in class if approved. As Mr Davis explained, it therefore makes sense to segment the existing supply accordingly. If one only looks at the purpose-built Grade A studios with premium support facilities, the existing stock decreases dramatically from 7.55 million square feet to 2.79 million, which comprises 7 studio complexes: Pinewood, Shepperton, Warner Brothers Leavesden, Shinfield, Sky Elstree, Eastbrook Dagenham, and Belfast Harbour Studios. And Mr Davis explained in relation to this list as follows. Pinewood is under a single lease to Disney until 2029. Shepperton is fully let to Netflix and Amazon until at least 2029. Warner Brothers Leavesden is owner-occupied by Warner Brothers Discovery, and space rarely becomes available for third-party productions. Sky Elstree is owner-occupied by Comcast, and they prioritise their own productions. It's not a like-for-like competitor for a multi-let studio. Then finally, Belfast Harbour is a significant geographical outlier developed by a trust port to deliver regeneration. The private sector would have been unlikely to make the financials work to deliver it. It's not a true competitor to the other studios in the West London cluster. Accordingly, Mr Davis considered that one could make a strong case that the true competing supply amount at present is actually only 717,800 square feet, which comes from Shinfield and Eastbrook Studios. The latter, according to Mr Davis, has only just reached practical completion and gives rise to speculation over whether production companies will commit to going to Dagenham on the other side of London to the West London cluster. And overall, Miss Neville considered that the pool of what isn't already tied up is quite limited. The council's blunt approach of simply pointing to the quantity of existing supply, divorced from any assessment of location, quality, and market appraisal, is not tenable. Looking at the pipeline for supply, Mr Davis considers that the potential Grade A pipeline in his evidence, he includes a table of sites which collectively amount to 4,648,500 square feet, which superficially sounds like a significant amount that will come forward and remove any need for Marlow. However, on Mr Davis's closer examination, almost all of these sites are A, lacking planning consent, B, are not being taken forward for reasons unrelated to market demand, C, are already spoken for by future owner-occupiers, or D, represent a significantly different offer to Marlow outside of the West London cluster. He therefore explained that there is significant doubt over how much of this is coming forward, but not because of any lack of demand. He also noted that even if delivered, few would match the quality of Marlow Film Studios. If one only looks at sites with planning permission or under construction, the figures reduce to 2.9 million square feet for the UK and just 1.2 million square feet for the West London cluster, which consists of Pinewood, Warner Brothers Leavesden, Wickham, and Bray. And of these, Bray will not be offered to the market as it is owned by Amazon. Warner Brothers Leavesden is similarly owner-occupied. Wickham has had a change of ownership structure and is being promoted for a higher value data centre. The future of Pinewood is also uncertain, but as Mr. Davis explained, this is not on account of an objective lack of market demand for new studio space, thereby pulling the rug from underneath the Rule 6 closing submissions of paragraph 8110. Instead, they are consulting upon the option of a more valuable data center development and would not consider studio space expansion without a pre-commitment from Disney. Mr. Davis also notes the appraisal of Knight Frank, which assesses a realistic pipeline of 1.3 million square feet. He concludes that the total conceivable future supply of stage space in the wider London area, which would be for general consumption, i.e. with planning permission, not owner-occupied, or already spoken for by a tenant and would be offered out to the market, could be as low as 1.07 million square feet. This would effectively be Pinewood and Sunset, of which only Pinewood is in the West London cluster. And as highlighted previously, Pinewood are assessing a possible pivot towards data centres. Overall, the appellant again contests the council's narrow approach of counting up the pipeline supply and saying there's enough without Marlow. This ignores the critical context of quality, location, and other scheme-specific evidence which raises questions unrelated to market demand about some of the pipeline schemes. So then in terms of matching the supply to the demand, Mr. Chodorovitz has said an additional 1.1 million square feet of studio stage floor space as per the reasonable potential pipeline of supply identified by Knight Frank and Mr. Davis would allow the UK to add £1 billion in annual spending on film and HGTV production, which would only represent a 1.7% share of the current global addressable market, and 1.4 to 1.5% of the projected 2030 market size. He considers this to be an entirely feasible gain in market share. And then if one adds in to that the 472,000 square feet at Marlow Film Studios to the pipeline supply, this increases the figure from £1 billion in annual spend to 1.4 billion, which amounts to only 2 to 2.5% of the global addressable market, 55 billion to 70 billion. Again, this is also entirely feasible given the UK's history of growth in film and HGTV production and its financial and non-financial competitiveness. Put another way, the UK currently holds a 12 to 13% market share. Increasing the UK's market share by only 2 percentage points would bring over £1.1 billion in production spend to the UK and practically fill a pipeline of 1.3 million square feet. A 3 percentage point increase would bring 1.65 billion in spend to the UK and fill the pipeline and leave enough production activity left over for Marlow. Mr. Chodorovitz was criticised for not identifying the precise segment or quantum of the global addressable market that might be obtained by the UK, at one point called the serviceable addressable market. This was also a key theme in the Rule 6's closing submissions. But this criticism completely misses his point and ignores the fact that such an exercise would be impossible. As he explained, his evidence is not suggesting that the UK will capture all of the global addressable demand, because such a position would be absurd. Instead, he can afford to be a lot less ambitious. He has assessed that it would be reasonable to expect that the UK will increase their global share of the market by a sufficient amount in order for there to be a demonstrable need for Marlow Film Studios. Assuming an annual production spend at Marlow Film Studios of £400 million, this represents under 1% of the 55 billion in the global addressable market. As he explained, if it was necessary to prove that the UK would need to capture more like 10% or more of the global addressable market in order for there to be a need for Marlow Film Studios, and this would be a bigger obstacle to its amount, but under 1% is certainly feasible for all of the myriad of reasons given by the appellant's need witnesses to support the candidacy of the UK for a greater global market share. This, of course, is comfortably within a realistic ambition for growth of this priority sector in the National Industrial Strategy. Put another way, if the global addressable market increases from the current figure of 55 billion to the 2030 projection of 62 to 70 billion, that is an increase of 7 to 15 billion pounds, which at the lower range is equivalent to 14 Marlow Film Studios. So even if a substantial amount of the global addressable market would not come to the UK and or would not come to Marlow, that is irrelevant to the point that Mr. Chodorowicz is making about the amount of flexibility in the growth forecast to accommodate a need for Marlow. This is the critical point which the Kershaw approach fails to grasp. Crucially, as Mr. Chodorowicz and other witnesses repeatedly explained, creating supply is a big part of stimulating demand and attracting more market share to the UK, especially when the new supply is top quality stage space like Marlow would be, and especially when the UK is so attractive for other reasons already, crew quality, financial incentives and language and so on. As Ms. Neville noted, we cannot be complacent. We need to be thinking about what we want the film industry to look like in 10 years, echoing the remarks of Netflix's Mr. King in May 2024. The Council has sought to place heavy reliance on what was said by Mr. Wootton in March 2024, that the BFC are not now in a process of trying to stimulate any new studio development in particular, above and beyond what has already been announced. However, as Ms. Neville pointed out, what he's referring to as announced is everything either under construction or, quote, in planning, which plainly included Marlow Film Studios. Furthermore, this statement is now nearly a year old, which is a long time in the fast-moving film sector. Turning next to the skills shortage, a recurrent theme of objection to the appellant's need case, both by the Council and the Rule 6 parties, was to point to evidence of a skills shortage in the UK as being an impediment to any future growth of the UK's film and TV industry. However, as the inspector heard from all of the appellant's need witnesses, this is not a sound argument to refuse planning permission for Marlow for a number of reasons. Firstly, the skills shortage in the sector is widely known and understood, and is the subject of significant attention in national and local policy and programmes. At a national level, consistently with the BFI's 2023 report titled A Sustainable Future for Skills, the Labour government has released a creative industries sector plan highlighting their commitment to growing the sector by providing a creative education for every child in England to foster creative and technical skills in the existing workforce and next generation. At a local level, there is the Buckinghamshire Local Skills Improvement Plan, the Buckinghamshire Local Skills Report, the Buckinghamshire Local Industrial Strategy, the Buckinghamshire LEP Economic Recovery Plan, and the Strategic Vision for Buckinghamshire, all of which expressly support skills growth in the local priority clusters, including the creative industries, through employment creation, training, and investment in skills. Thirdly, a major driver in solving the skills shortage is to develop new stage space, especially grade A space, so that those seeking new employment in this industry can see that there are jobs for them at the end of any training or further education in the creative sector. Fourth, as Mrs. Evans explained, of all the areas in the UK to best seek to address the skills shortage, the West London cluster is best placed. Given the existing established ecosystem, the area already benefits from the National Film and Television School in Beaconsfield, Buckinghamshire New University, and the Buckinghamshire College Group with a new campus in High Wycombe. Fifth, setting it apart from any other film studio in the UK, Marlow Film Studios will provide an 11,700 square feet culture and skills academy, which will play a unique and leading role in skills and workforce development, delivering 60 new training places per year for 10 years, with measures to be put in place to try and draw 40 of these trainees from local postcodes, with a 40% or better weighting for BPOC and inclusivity candidates, a bursary fund to promote broader access to training courses, £105,000 per annum for 10 years, a skills oversight board, a visit to the studios for 650 children at Marlow schools per year, the employment of a skills coordinator to oversee the implementation and operation of the training and education programs, and involvement on a regular basis with the Bucks Skills Advisory Panel. So sixth, while objectors have sought to diminish the significance of this offer, it plainly represents a meaningful attempt to address the skills shortage, which is more than can be said for the case in favour of refusing planning permission. Seventh, the strength of the offer is reflected in the many supporters who came to give evidence during the third-party sessions at this inquiry, which included representatives from some of the local education institutions, local employment support charities, and young people interested in a job in the creative sector. Eighth, the skills shortage objection overlooks a significant and obvious point concerning timescales. As Mr. Davis explained, Marlow Film Studios will not be built overnight, and neither will the skills shortage be solved overnight. The growth of the film sector in the UK is a long-term economic objective, with stage space increasing over time alongside the skill shortage being addressed. Ninth, upskilling to provide sufficient jobs for Marlow Film Studios is not an unrealistic objective. As Mrs. Evans explained, there are 155,490 FTEs in the Metro London region alone, and so an additional 2,000 employees at Marlow Film Studios represents a modest 1.5% increase on this figure. As Ms. Neville explained, the sector has achieved a significant upskilling before, during the significant increase in the industry over the past decade. It can continue to do so with this track record. She expressed her own confidence in the ability to crew up from her unrivaled expertise in the film industry. And similarly, Mr. Wotton, for the BFC, speaking in March 2024, was cautiously optimistic about initiatives to address the skills shortage. 11th, the objection relating to the skills shortage fundamentally lacks ambition and is disappointing coming from an authority who supposedly have committed in numerous local programs and policies to support an upskilling of the creative sector locally. It does not chime well with national growth objectives either. Ultimately, there is also a need to recognise the proper remit of the planning system. The Secretary of State can grant planning permission for new stage space as a driver to stimulate the desired growth of the sector. It is a matter for other local and national measures to address the skills shortage. The planning system is not a cure for all ills, but rather plays an important role in the overall agenda. The West London cluster, another feature of the case against Marlow Film Studios, has been how the LPA and the Rule 6 parties have sought to downplay the significance of the West London cluster in an attempt to suggest that any need for additional studio space to meet existing and future demand could readily be located elsewhere. This has been a distinctly surprising approach for the council to take as the custodians of one of the preeminent film clusters in the world. Again, the appellant's need witnesses have rebutted this line of attack robustly. Each witness from their different perspectives and expertise has explained the central importance of the West London cluster in the market as being the predominant location for major film and HETV production in the UK. As Mrs. Evans explained, the benefits of industrial clustering from an economic perspective include productivity, innovation and growth, and it is therefore no surprise that the UK government has recognised the importance of clusters. Mr. Davis described the WLC as the epicentre, and the conversations with investors in the US are much easier when talking about pursuing a production in the West London cluster as opposed to elsewhere. The West London cluster's global significance and international recognition is rooted in 1, existing world-class studio facilities already, to which Marlow Film Studios will be proximate. 2, the established ecosystem combining heritage with modern production capabilities. 3, a reputation making it an already preferred destination for major international projects and independent filmmakers. 4th, access to the best crew. 5th, access to the necessary supply chain and satellite supporting industries. 6th, access to Heathrow Airport. Ms. Neville stated that overseas investors and producers are drawn to the West London cluster and will be reluctant to go elsewhere because it is about simplicity and the lowest risk. It therefore lacks commercial common sense for a major new Grade A studio like the Appeal scheme to be located anywhere else in the UK. The Appeal site is an obvious location in which to meet the demonstrable need for new studio space if the UK is going to succeed in their ambition to grow its share of the global market. So then why Marlow? Taking all of the evidence above together, the appellant considers that there is a demonstrable need for Marlow Film Studios from both a quantitative and qualitative perspective. In the case of quantity, the need witnesses have comprehensively proven that more stage space will be needed in order to capture even a modest additional amount of the global addressable market for film and TV production spend, notwithstanding the existing pipeline. And secondly, as for quality, there is no challenge from either the council or the Rule 6 parties to the appellant's contention that Marlow Film Studios will be best in class. There is no doubt that the world-class design is entirely different from what has been seen elsewhere. The need witnesses have all attested to the need for a top quality facility in order to attract the best new business to the UK by turning the heads of the top film producers in the world and making them want to come to the UK instead of going elsewhere. This is the epitome of the strong competitive economy desired by the framework, because a high-quality studio will drive a race to the top as other studios identify the need to up their game in order to compete. If the opportunity presented by Marlowe is not taken up, then other countries will develop their own Grade A facilities, and that chance to grasp a bigger market share for the UK will be lost. In simple terms, the approach of the council in simply totting up total stage space and looking at production spend is wholly inadequate and ignores the transformative role that Marlowe can play in a qualitative sense by catalyzing a bigger slice of the global market. Displacement and additionality, there's been much debate about these important concepts, but they can be dealt with shortly given all of the above. As Mrs. Evans explained, since the whole point of Marlowe is to attract a new and bigger share of the global addressable market, it is by definition additional to the existing market share in the UK. Thus, if the appellant is right about there being a demonstrable need, then the benefit of Marlowe Film Studios is additional rather than displacing the existing share. Accordingly, while Mrs. Evans accepted that some film and TV production might go to Marlowe Film Studios instead of going to other Grade A studios in the UK, those other studios would still be attracting alternative productions as part of the UK share. Mr. Davis and Mrs. Evans both noted that some studio space at present comprises repurposed industrial buildings, sometimes temporary. Therefore, even assuming a degree of displacement, those temporary spaces would likely be changed back to other beneficial industrial uses for which there is a need. Economic benefits, as set out in the evidence of Mrs. Evans, the suite of economic benefits arising from the scheme is comprehensive. Firstly, while the nature of the development means that job creation can only be expressed as a range, she confirmed in her evidence in chief that the appeal scheme would create around 2,060 direct FTE jobs. Applying a conservative 25% displacement figure, this amounts to 1,545 FTE net direct jobs. Then applying the multiplier effect, the studios would also support around 1,545 FTE indirect and induced jobs through expanded supply chains and worker incomes, giving rise to benefits to other sectors which are indirectly supported by the activity at MFS. The direct activity at Marlowe Film Studios would deliver around 200 million in direct GVA. The direct activity at Marlowe Film Studios would also result in tax revenues of around 65 million per year, increasing to 80 million when considering net additional tax receipts. And in terms of production spend, the significant scale of Marlowe Film Studios is entirely deliberate to maximize productivity. As Mrs. Evans explained, the 18-stage facility can bring disproportionate benefits when compared with an 8-stage facility. It can support the production of 2 major films at once, while further supporting another film in the preparation or post-production stage, or alternatively 3 HETV shows. Mrs. Evans notes the evidence of Knight Frank as to the lack of larger production spaces, i.e. studios greater than 100,000 square feet, making up only 17% of the total supply. This considerable flexibility at MFS is a huge advantage and attraction to the market. The studios will be capable of supporting an average production of 3 major feature films or 4 HETV shows per year, and this amounts to production expenditure of between 255 to 600 million every year. And as noted above, this represents a small percentage of the forecast growth in global production expenditure by 2030, and is therefore readily obtainable by the UK if MFS is permitted to go ahead. Since it will be competing for that global share, the production spend benefit is additional to the UK economy. Then there's the employment and skills opportunities arising from the appeal scheme, in particular the Culture and Skills Academy, the supply chain opportunities for the supply chain firms in and around the West London cluster, given the large chain involved in film production, construction phase benefits. And then the council has accepted that these benefits should be given significant weight. The appellant submits that these economic benefits should be given substantial weight. And so then in conclusion on need and economic benefits, to be appropriate development in the green belt, the appellant has to show a demonstrable unmet need for the appeal scheme. As set out above, in determining whether there is such a need, the framework asks what is needed to proactively support the growth of the creative industries in the UK, not what is needed in the short or medium term to meet existing needs. That means asking what is needed to support growth of the UK's share of the global addressable market for film and HGTV production, which is forecast to grow significantly in the coming years. Once calibrated in that way, the existing and pipeline supply is manifestly insufficient to meet the need to support that growth. As Ms. Neville put it, it is about the difference between being good enough and being excellent. Mr. Davis said that granting permission for Marlow Film Studios would be sending a clear message to the rest of the world and put the UK on the front foot. The insufficiency of the existing supply and pipeline to accommodate growth in the UK's market share is true both qualitatively and quantitatively. On either case, there is a clear and demonstrable need for Marlow as a Grade A new studio to attract more of the global market to the UK and thereby deliver on the UK government's objectives in both the framework and the National Industrial Strategy. The appellants need witnesses have collectively established the exciting and unmissable opportunity arising from this scheme as a major game changer for the local and national economy. By contrast, the Council and the Rule 6 Party have taken an approach of pessimism, with no ambition or understanding of the economic and filmmaking potential of the scheme. Notably, they were entirely unable to provide evidence from the wider film sector opposing Marlow. One would expect the other major studios to be opposing the scheme with all their might if there was a perceived oversupply of studio space. Now I'll hand back over to Mr. White.
Mom, can you hear me? Are you happy for us to plough on? We're now on page 41 of about 73. Would you like a 5-minute break, or would you like us to?
I'm happy to carry on. I'm just conscious. My daughter is walking home from school and she's going to knock on the window and ask me to let her in. So I'm going to have to pause at one point just to jump off my seat and open the front door for her. So I'll interrupt you at some point, but carry on for now.
That is fine. I, of course, just got an Amazon delivery while Mr. Fraser was speaking. So.
The Amazon van drove up and I was like, don't come here. Continue on, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mum. Can I then go on to the section 6, the landscape, and I'll take the first bit reasonably quickly, because basically on the methodology, the point we want to stress is that Mr. Smith clearly has done an LVIA and Mr. Kennett, as he readily accepted, hasn't. I will also take the character in the locality of the appeal site as read, because you're very familiar about it and the character areas, but I would just like to emphasise para 181 that Mr. Smith could see why the busy character judgment had been reached about the Thames floodplain, given the number of built elements in marked contrast to the Thames Valley slope, which is largely free of development. And of course, as you saw on your numerous site visits, the eastern edge of Marlow includes a large area of commercial development and with the A404. And Mr. Kennett was right to accept, as he did, that it couldn't be described, the appeal site, as picturesque. Then also with the character of the appeal site, can I largely take that as read, because again we'll rely on your impressions, but we just list the key points. We would note the landfill, the larger buildings, the partially enclosed nature, the noise that exists, the footpath, the fact that the dark skies area is not designated as part of dark skies by the CBRE work. And then also there's the point about the nature of the restoration. You'll recall Mr. Smith gave quite a lot of evidence in chief on that. So then can I move on to landscape value? And of course we've got, as a requirement of NPPF para 187, and I'm in para 184, you are required to make a judgment as to whether that guidance does relate to the appeal site. And of course it's a key point of dispute between Mr. Kennett and Mr. Smith. And of course, a review of the existing landscape designations is the starting point, common ground between the witnesses that the site's not within a landscape or landscape-related designation. And Mr. Kennett also confirmed that Wickham had previously utilised a local landscape designation in their last local plan, but that has been dropped and has not been pursued in relation to the appeal site. Of course, we know that the national landscape is both to the north and is clearly a valued landscape. But Mr. Smith emphasised the need to focus on the value of the site itself, albeit in context. And as you know, Landscape Institute's TGN 0221, of which Mr. Smith is a co-author, says uses criteria. It defines a valued landscape as an area identified as having sufficient landscape qualities to elevate it above other more everyday landscapes. Mr. Smith's words were that the landscape needs to be better than average. Tellingly, Mr. Kennett revealed that he disagreed there was a need to show something out of the ordinary, which indicates he's taken an overly relaxed approach, which we say doesn't accord with the guidance. Importantly, a conclusion that a landscape is not valued for the MPPF or TGM purposes is not a conclusion that the landscape is lacking in any class. Sorry, value, not class. I don't know where that came from. Any value. Mr. Smith's assessment of landscape value against the relevant criteria results in a conclusion of generally low value of the site due to its poor condition, low natural heritage value, relatively low cultural heritage value, low recreational value, generally poor scenic quality, and low sense of tranquility, remoteness. However, he did elevate the value of the site to community due to the proximity of the national landscape and the partial intervisibility with the
Mr. White?
designation. Yeah,
Can I just stop you and let her in? I'll be back in
of
1
course,
second. 1
of
minute.
course.
Oh, a minute. Okay, I'm back. Thank you.
No, absolutely. I think I was just finishing off para 188, and just to saying that the value, the community value, can be contrasted with the national value for the national landscape and local authority value for Winter Hill. Mr. Smith accordingly found that while the national landscape and Winter Hill are valued landscapes, the appeal site, the Thames floodplain and Marlow are not. Mr. Kennett's approach for finding the site to be a valued landscape, we say, should be rejected by you in conclusion, because first, despite being in the process of assessing the appeal scheme since the early stages, Mr. Kennett did not assert the site was valued landscape in any of his consultation responses, as he willingly acknowledged when I put those questions to him. Such an assertion was also not activated or made in the October 23 or May 24 officer reports to the Strategic Sites Committee. It didn't feature even as late as the reasons of refusal. It didn't even form part of the council's case in their statement of case. And just that's a passage of 2.5 years. It was only when prompted by Mr. Smith in the discussions on the draft statement of common ground relating to landscape that Mr. Kennett suddenly turned his mind for the first time to the question of valued landscape, and his view in cross-examination was that it was an oversight. In any event, on substance, we say Mr. Kennett's conclusion is overblown. He concludes that the existing landscape of which the site is an integral part has a moderate to high value, just one notch down from the very highest value. Indeed, in the same paragraph of his evidence, he finds the site to have high value when considering its relationship to adjacent landscapes, particularly the adjoining Chilterns National Landscape. Elsewhere, he claims that the site itself is part of a highly valued landscape, but his error is to just blend the appeal site in with Winter Hill and the national landscape, rather than identify the evident differences in landscape value between the appeal site and the more valued areas to the north and south. Thirdly, his analysis supporting his conclusion that the site's a valued landscape was flawed. In finding that the site has a distinctive landscape with a high scenic quality, he talks about water bodies, but nothing about the site itself. He refers to significant conservation and natural heritage interests, but without giving any examples or indication of what he's referring to. He claims the site is rich in recreational activity, but appears to be referring to areas outside the site. Indeed, he was vague in oral evidence concerning what the precise area he considers to be valued landscape actually is. He strangely suggested that the sewage treatment works and the athletics track to the east could fall within his valued landscape. Fourth, he claims that the poor condition of the site is due to poor landscape management, but as noted above, that significantly underplays the issues. The poor restoration makes a return to intact pasture and recreational use inappropriate. Fifthly, he appears to place some weight on the wider Chilterns boundary review, which we know is being undertaken. Weights also given to this in the council's closing this morning. But Natural England's letter of the 29th of May of last year states the proposed development is located partly within an area which Natural England has assessed as meeting the criteria. However, Natural England have not provided any details at all for this assessment. No natural beauty report is in the public domain and has been published. The letter refers to the development being either within or partly within, and therefore there's no clarity as to the apparent boundaries of any proposed extension. The letter is clear that the site may, not will, be included in a proposed variation. The letter also states this assessment process does not confer any additional planning protection, and Natural England explicitly find that the Chilterns is a valued landscape for MPPF purposes and omit any suggestion that the site itself is one. As Mr. Smith explained in cross-examination, the boundary review process is a long process and we're right at the beginning of it. There's no certainty as to what will be proposed in the first place, and any proposed extension would be the subject of objections at a formal public inquiry and require confirmation by the Secretary of State. For those reasons, the appellant considers little or no weight can be attached by you to Natural England's suggestion that at least part of the site has been assessed as meeting the criteria. We would far prefer you to prefer Mr. Smith's own natural beauty assessment in his evidence, in which he concludes that the appeal site in its context has very little evidence of meeting any of the natural beauty criteria. This area is therefore not suitable for designation as a national landscape. Therefore, we invite you to agree with Mr. Smith that the site overall is not valued landscape. Then can we deal with the assessment of landscape effects and then start off with sensitivity? Mr. Smith has assessed the sensitivity of the landscape receptors in and around the site by combining the value of the receptors with their susceptibility to the appeal proposals, as some of his judgments are in his evidence, so that it is clear how Mr. Smith has combined value and susceptibility to arrive at sensitivity of each receptor. Sensitivity, of course, refers to the ability of a receptor to accommodate the proposed development without undue consequences for the maintenance of the baseline situation. As Mr. Smith explained, this definition is important in two ways. It means that parts of the landscape which are already influenced by large-scale built form, lighting and noise are less susceptible to the appeal proposals. It also means that the appeal site itself is the most susceptible to the change proposed, since this is the location where the direct changes will occur. Changes elsewhere will be indirect and largely visual, and if those landscapes already have some visibility of settlement in large-scale built form, then even the most valued landscapes, such as the National Landscape or Windhill, must have lower susceptibility. As judgment of sensitivity accordingly varies. The character of the appeal site is medium. Sensitivity of the Thames floodplain reduces outside of the site. The sensitivity of character areas in the Chiltern National Landscape is medium. Similarly, the Windhill character areas are of medium-low sensitivity. As he explained, the question of whether the assessment of sensitivity changes depending on whether you are in or outside of the appeal site is one of the most crucial differences between him and Mr. Kennett. Contrary to Mr. Smith's methodological approach, Mr. Kennett's judgments on sensitivity do not set out how sensitivity has been defined by combining susceptibility and value. For example, Mr. Kennett stated that the Thames floodplain, LCA as a whole, is moderately to highly sensitive to the development proposed. Mr. Smith cannot understand how that susceptibility does not reduce as one gets further away from the site. Mr. Kennett also found that the National Landscape and Windhill have high sensitivity, again suggesting that his assessment of the susceptibility of the National Landscape and Windhill have not been reduced to reflect the fact that there have been no direct changes to those character areas. It is tantamount to claiming that those areas have the same susceptibility as plot 1 on the appeal site. This could be acceptable if you did not directly have built form traffic light and noise influencing the appeal site. Indirect effects on the National Landscape and Windhill will arise, but it's hard to see how these areas can be at their highest level of sensitivity, notwithstanding their value. This consideration of sensitivity is important because Mr. Smith sees it as driving the differences between him and Mr. Kennett. Then the magnitude of landscape change, and in accordance with Glivia, and assessing the magnitude of effects, you need to look at scale, geographical extent, and the duration of effects. As per Glivia, it's necessary to assess which elements will be lost and the proportion of total extent that these represent, which highlights the particular importance of direct changes, since these would result in comprehensive change to an area. Secondly, the degree to which the aesthetic and perceptual aspects of the landscape are altered, i.e. areas which are already influenced by built form, lighting and noise, would experience less change to aesthetic and perceptual aspects as a result of new built development, and whether there's a change to the key characteristics of the landscape. As Mr. Smith explained, the only direct changes that affect the Thames floodplain, and in particular the appeal site in its immediate context. Other areas are already influenced, most visually, but also by noise, by existing settlements and other characters. Therefore, he judges a substantial medium magnitude of effect for the character of the appeal site itself, with this reducing to slight for the Thames floodplain outside of the immediate site context, and slight for the Thames Valley slope character area, and slight for the Windhill character area. Mr. Kennett's approach is again different. He assesses a high magnitude of change to the site in its context, which he defines as extending eastwards all the way to Bourne End. Therefore, he sees no difference between direct changes to the site itself and indirect changes elsewhere towards Bourne End. And Mr. Kennett rightly accepts that the proposal would be perceived as an expansion of the existing business parks at the eastern end of Marlow, rather than insertion of new. But that important existing aesthetic and perceptual context has not been factored into his judgments of magnitude of effect on the Thames floodplain receptor. Therefore, reaching a judgment on landscape effects overall, Mr. Smith's overall judgments are as follows. Major, moderate, negative and significant effects upon the landscape character of the site and its immediate context. Less than significant effects outside of the immediate vicinity of the appeal site, but still within the Thames floodplain LCA. Moderate, minor and less than significant effects on the Thames Valley Slope LCA within the Chilterns National Landscape. Moderate, minor and less than significant effects on the Winter Hill LCA. Mr. Smith emphasised that the development would be focused upon the part of the Thames floodplain that's already influenced by large-scale built form, traffic noise and lighting. Other landscapes such as the National Landscape and Winter Hill would experience little or no direct changes, and these landscapes already have views over large-scale built form on the edge of Marlow. They are already affected to some extent by traffic and settlement. The appeal site does have a busy character, and it's right next to Marlow with clear intervisibility between Windhill and the Chilterns National Landscape being preserved. The overall balance and composition of the Thames Valley would therefore remain the same with the development in place. Then dealing with the effects on the national landscape and its setting. The setting of the national landscape is defined as the area outside of the designation where development might have an effect on the natural beauty and special qualities of the national landscape. The test in the local plan in policy DM30 carefully and deliberately distinguishes between development within and development in the setting. As for the latter, the policy requirement is not to resist any adverse impact on the natural beauty of the national landscape rising from development in its setting. It is only to avoid a significant adverse impact. Mr. Smith has concluded there would be no significant adverse effects on the landscape character areas within the Chilterns National Landscape, and Mr. Smith has also assessed the potential effects on the natural beauty of the designation by considering the potential effects on the special qualities of designation, e.g. tranquility, wildness and cultural heritage. Consistent with policy DM30, a significant adverse effect is avoided, and consistent with MPPF Power 189, the development in the setting of the national landscape has been sensitively located and designed to avoid or minimise adverse impacts. Although Mr. Kennett has identified moderate and significant effects on the Thames Valley slope within the national landscape, he has not assessed anywhere in his evidence the effects on natural beauty or the special qualities of the designation. Indeed, he admitted in oral evidence that of the 13 special qualities of the national landscape listed in the Chilterns A and B management plan, he only claimed that 2 would be affected. You might remember, Ma'am, that passage of cross-examination when we discussed it. So then moving on to visual effects, invariably given the nature and the scale of the development, the proposal will be visible from a distance. There are 2 zones of theoretical visibility identified by Mr. Smith, depending on whether the temporary back lot is included or excluded. These are theoretical and worst case scenarios, ZTVs, since a maximum vegetation of height of up to 10 metres is assumed, where many tree groups and woodlands extend over 20 metres. The model excludes lower hedgerows and smaller tree groups. All existing built form is shown as a maximum height of 9 metres, and all proposed planting is excluded. Mr. Smith's evidence identifies a range of key viewpoints, including for residential receptors and for recreational users. He's also prepared photo montages to try and give an impression of the anticipated views of the appeal scheme in context. There's much in relation to visual effects where Mr. Smith and Mr. Kennett agree. Therefore, Mr. Smith sought in his oral evidence to focus on 3 key viewpoints where they disagree. The first is viewpoint 9, which of course is the view for walkers on the footpath in the national landscape looking south, and therefore the receptors have high sensitivity. The magnitude of effect was identified by Mr. Smith as slight, noting the guidance in Glivia that there needs to be an assessment of the degree of contrast between existing and proposed and the integration of new features. He noted that in both, the existing commercial buildings form a key characteristic in the middle ground, and the proposals would extend the amount of commercial buildings visible in the middle ground were buildings of a similar scale and character. There would be no change to the foreground within the national landscape and clear continued visibility to Winter Hill, forming the skyline. Therefore, overall, a moderate negative effect and less than significant. In terms of viewpoint 3, again, view from walkers on a North National Landscape footpath, that's slightly to the east. Magnitude again slight. Commercial buildings are already visible behind the site, and Marlow extends across the valley in the middle distance. The proposals would extend the amount of visible commercial buildings, but these would appear on the Thames floodplain, where existing developments, including Marlow, is already located. There'd be no change to the national landscape in the foreground and clear visibility to Wind Hill and the skyline. Again, a moderate negative effect, but less than significant. Then viewpoint S. This viewpoint is from the open access area in the valued landscape of Winter Hill, which therefore warrants high sensitivity, and the magnitude of effect is again slight. The proposal would clearly be visible, but it would be seen in the context of other built form on the Thames floodplain in Marlow, which forms the background to the site. The Chilterns National Landscape remains clearly visible. There'd be no change to the foreground, and the eastern end of the Thames floodplain is also untouched. Therefore, moderate negative effect, less than significant. Therefore, Mum, you will obviously be in a position to judge the visual impact for yourself based on your site visit and other impressions of the visualizations. The appellant accepts that the scheme would inevitably result in some significant visual effects, albeit that these are overstated by Mr. Kennett. The key point of Mr. Smith is that the significant effects would be mainly focused upon the appeal site and its immediate context. Unlike the landscape effects, it is accepted there'd be some significant visual effects further from the site. However, these are valued viewpoints, and therefore even a slight magnitude of change can result in significant effect. Views from Wind Hill and the National Landscape footpaths tend to be panoramic, and the proposed buildings are therefore viewed within a wider context, which includes settlements and other developments on the Thames floodplain. In all of these panoramic views, there remains clear intervisibility between the national landscape and Wind Hill, such that the overall character and composition of the Thames Valley is still clearly perceived. Finally, these views are usually part of a sequential experience, which includes views towards Marlow and other development on the Thames floodplain. Accordingly, we say the visual effects would not significantly affect the experience of the relative remoteness and tranquility in the national landscape, but with views towards settlement and development in the busy Thames floodplain. Relative remoteness and tranquility on Wind Hill and Chiltern Way, but with views over settlement, roads and other development on the Thames floodplain. And then the distinctive pattern of landscape character areas within the Thames Valley, which would continue to have the same overall balance and composition, i.e. a mix of settlement, urban fringe and rural uses on the floodplain, with the prominent wooden scarp of Wind Hill and the clear intervisibility with the Chilterns. Therefore, in summary on landscape and visual impacts, we say the development would not change the overall composition and character of the wider Thames Valley, including the landscape character areas of Wind Hill, the Thames floodplain, and the landscape character areas within the national landscape. The harm to the Thames Valley in the setting of the Children's National Landscape, alleged in reason of refusal 3 and the evidence of Mr. Kennett, is overstated. The scheme would not obscure views between the Thames Valley and the national landscape, nor would it break the continuity of an open rural landscape between them, nor would it have significant effects upon either the natural beauty or the special qualities of the national landscape. Secondly, associated landscape spaces and the public rights of way improvements do not change the fundamental character of the countryside amenity that's currently enjoyed, and entirely consistent with the various forms of development encouraged by the Little Marlow Pits SPG. That said, we are candid about the scheme's landscape and visual impacts and accept that these have to be weighed fairly and properly in the planning balance that you need to undertake. And then in relation to the specific policies in relation to reason of refusal 3, Mum, I'm tempted in view of the time to just take those as read. You'll obviously take your time to read those. And then can I then hand over again to Mr. Fraser, who'll do his last contribution and he'll read out section 7. Thank you. We should form a double act, Mr. Fraser.
I know, it's genuinely quite tempting. Section 7, highways and transport. Paragraph 212 sets out the 3 reasons for refusal, 4, 5 and 6.
Mr. Fraser, I can't see you.
Can you see me now?
I can see you now. Thank you.
That will be because I didn't have my camera turned on. So yes, paragraph 213 then confirms that reason for refusal 4 gives rise to 3 separate matters: congestion, safety, and parking. But the council have confirmed in their closing submissions that the parking concern has been resolved by the Section 106 agreement. In relation to congestion, paragraph 214 sets out the now well-known test of severity. 215 notes the previous appeal decisions and the severe threshold being the highest threshold in the framework. The council's remaining concern regarding congestion is limited to 2 points. Firstly, the criticism that the VISIN model should have been extended further to the west to consider the highway implications of traffic associated with the film studios on the A4155 between the crossing adjacent to Bodmore Lane and Marlow Town Centre. And then secondly, a criticism of how achievable the 60-40 modal split will be, including the effectiveness of the travel plan and the OMP. Because of these 2 points, the council has been unable to rule out a severe cumulative residual impact on the A4155. Taking the modelling point first, it is important to recognise that the council is not itself identifying evidence of a severe impact, but rather challenging the adequacy of the modelling undertaken by the appellant. The council has agreed with the appellant that within the limits of model extents, the model provides a robust assessment tool for considering the implications of traffic associated with the film studios at the proposed site access roundabout and Westhorpe interchange. And as explained in the evidence of Mr. Dix, there is an existing problem at Westhorpe interchange in weekday peak periods, especially within the AM peak hour, namely queuing on the off-slip roads being close to backing up onto the A404 main line for short periods. This will only be exacerbated by future increases in traffic levels irrespective of the scheme. These future increases would result in a serious road safety risk, i.e. by stationary vehicles backed up on the A404 main line, queuing to exit off a slip road, being struck by vehicles travelling at 70 miles an hour. The council fully appreciated this problem, but withdrew a proposed improvement scheme in January 2023, as it proved unfeasible due to the inability to secure agreement with National Highways. Through assessment work, it has been identified that the existing issues at Westhorpe interchange are limited to the weekday peak periods, especially within the AM peak hour. From around 8:20 to 8:40, observations have shown that there is blocking back onto the junction from the Little Marlow Road exit, i.e. the exit from Westhorpe interchange into Marlow. The main factor causing this existing issue is the use of a pedestrian crossing on Little Marlow Road, adjacent to the junction with Bodmore Lane, by children going to Great Marlow School. So as part of the appeal scheme, the appellant will fix this existing issue by replacing the existing zebra crossing at Bodmore Lane with a signalised toucan crossing with a MOVA control system. The VISIN modelling in October and November 2024 was revised to assess the implications of this improvement of the crossing at Bodmore Lane, alongside the other improvements at Westhorpe interchange itself to signalise and widen the approaches. National Highways has accepted that the agreed modelling identified that without mitigation there would be an increased risk of queuing on the A404 off-slip roads, blocking back onto the A404 main line in both the with and without proposed development scenarios. The proposed improvement scheme would mitigate the significant road safety risk by enabling the effective management of queuing on the A404 off-slip roads. The modelling results are summarised by Mr. Dixon's evidence, and Mr. Tester accepted that these modelling results did not themselves indicate any severe impact, leaving only his point about the extent of the model. They indicate minor increases in traffic on local roads, which is not unusual when grade-separated junctions like the Westhorpe interchange are placed under traffic signal control. In any event, the benefits of the improvement scheme outweigh any such minor increases. Mr. Tester's remaining concern about the extent of the model can be taken shortly. As Mr. Dix explained, the concern arises only during the AM peak from the proposed improvement of Bodmore Lane, i.e. by the removal of an existing constraint on westbound traffic movements going along the Little Marlow Road from Westhorpe interchange towards Marlow Town Centre. During that AM peak hour, there would be fewer than 20 vehicles travelling from the film studios westbound along Little Marlow Road. As such, these levels of traffic would have no material impact on the operation of the relevant junctions in Marlow Town Centre beyond the model extents. In any event, all of those junctions have already been the subject of individual junction capacity assessment models. the level of westbound traffic included in those individual models is higher than that identified in the VISIM model. It therefore presents a worst case, and on the results obtained from the individual modelling, there is no material impact at these junctions from traffic associated with the film studios. The obvious implication is that there is no need to extend the geographical ambit of the modelling into Marlow Town Centre, because it can be confirmed on the existing evidence that there would not be a severe impact arising from the scheme. The only other matter relating to congestion is the council's suggestion that the modal shift to 60% single occupancy vehicle usage is unrealistic, and therefore the congestion will be greater than has been assessed. The council therefore argue that for the purposes of the framework para 116, the managed scenario is not a, quote, reasonable future scenario. This is flawed for three reasons. Firstly, the traffic modelling undertaken by the appellant has modelled both a managed and an unmanaged scenario. The former assumes the achievement of a 60-40 modal split, but the latter does not. The unmanaged scenario is a predict and provide assessment with no account taken of any modal shift. Accordingly, the traffic modelling has not assumed the achievement of the proposed modal split, and based on the modelling results set out by Mr. Dix, there will be no severe residual highway impacts even in the unmanaged scenario. Second, in any event, the managed scenario, based on the modal split of 60-40 to be achieved by the travel plan, is realistic, as set out by Mr. Dix. To achieve the proposed target of 60%, 40% non-car usage is required. This comprises the 15.8% of non-car trips from the census data for journeys to work in the area, plus an additional 24.2%, with only a modest assumption of car sharing, which will be encouraged through the travel plan. The modal shift can be achieved by an 8% change in public transport usage and a 1.5% change in walking and cycling. Even without car sharing, the percentage changes are only 16.7% and 7.5%. These numbers are all readily achievable, given the significant improvements to accessibility by public transport and for pedestrians and cyclists, which will be set out below. Mr. Dix's evidence relating to other studios is consistent with his view as to the 60-40 split being achievable. A theme of the council's case has been to undermine the modal shift target by reliance upon the other studios, but one needs to bear in mind that every studio will be different depending on the scheme, the location in terms of accessibility to non-car modes, the timing of the surveys, and the measures proposed to support a modal shift. With those factors in mind, the appellant would caution against over-reliance upon other studios, recognising that Marlow Film Studios is unashamedly ambitious and progressive when it comes to sustainable modes of transport, heralding a new era of high-quality and sustainable film studios in the industry. The whole scheme is prepared in accordance with the vision and validate philosophy, rather than the former predict and provide school of thought. National Highways fully recognise this, taking into account both the travel plan and the OMP. The council's approach, by contrast, has been firmly predict and provide, with no account taken of the travel plan or the OMP or the vision-led approach in the framework. With all of that in mind, Mr. Dix has noted that the monitoring results of Pinewood were based on a limited survey and only of permanent office staff, and at a time when results would have been significantly affected by COVID. In any event, Pinewood is next to a much smaller settlement than Marlow, and with a train station that is much further away. Elstree is an example of how the provision of alternative modes of transport can achieve impressive levels of non-car usage. Shepperton has issues in terms of site accessibility for non-car modes. Even with this, a worst case on car sharing would result in 64% car driving if the modal shift of 10% in the travel plan is achieved. The local highway authority for Warner Brothers have accepted a modal target of 62% for single occupancy vehicles, which is essentially the same as for Marlow Film Studios. In any event, as noted above, Marlow is trying to do things differently for the future, in accordance with Vision and Validate. The appellant should not be criticised for seeking an ambitious travel plan with a significant suite of improvements to encourage sustainable means of travel. Unlike all the other studios set out above, the appellant is the only one to sign up to an operational management plan, limiting peak period traffic to specified levels, and Section 106 obligations requiring improvement if the modal split is not achieved. Collectively, for the reasons given by Mr. Dix, there will be no severe impact on the highway network. The reality is that the appeal site is in a remarkably good location, right off the strategic road network. As Mr. Dix noted, you can't really get any closer to the strategic road network. The improvement scheme for the Westhorpe interchange will deliver a much-needed betterment on the existing situation overall. In relation to safety, the framework requires that development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. The only remaining safety concern relates to whether the existing departure from standards on the A4155 westbound approach to Westhorpe interchange needs to be fully addressed. This very limited matter can be taken shortly. The Council's concern, as articulated by Mr. Tester, appears to be about vehicles accelerating towards the Westhorpe interchange from the east in order to beat the light. As Mr. Dix explained, the current layout at Westhorpe interchange has been in place for many years and features a number of departures from standard. There have been no reported accidents at this approach to the junction, as this indicates the departure from standards is not necessarily an issue in itself, and the key question is always whether the departure would give rise to a road safety problem. As the DMRB confirms, location constraints are often the dominating factor when designing improvements to existing junctions. And this is the case on the A4155 westbound approach, where removal of the departure is not possible. Improvement, however, is possible, and that is what is proposed. It is agreed that the proposed position is an improvement over the existing position. As part of the proposed development, 3 of the approaches, including the westbound approach, will be placed under traffic signal control, which will reduce vehicular speeds onto the roundabout. Critically, and conspicuously ignored in the Council's closing, the proposed site access roundabout will reduce speeds of westbound traffic onto the A4155 into the Westhorpe interchange. The traffic is currently a multi-lane approach where traffic speeds are de-restricted. The new roundabout will be a physical impediment which will force reductions in speed. The new roundabout and the reduced speeds will allow consideration of a reduction of speed limits through a traffic regulation order. The Road Safety Audit Commission by National Highways did not consider this departure from standards to be a road safety problem. And also addressing this departure would also create more serious issues, including the potential for sideswipe accidents, since it is difficult to safely accommodate vehicles within each lane, given the proximity of the approach to the A404 southbound on-slip road. So to reiterate, the improvement scheme also overall will address a serious road safety risk that will occur in the future, even without the film studios in place, i.e. the scheme will result in a positive betterment on the existing position in terms of road safety. Parking, as noted above, the Council's closing at paragraph 111 confirms that this concern has been resolved by the section 106. However, the appellant has set out some points below because they're still related to the Council's continued opposition, and parking is also a concern for the Rule 6 parties, but I'll take these points in relation to parking as read and resume at 235. The framework provides that significant development like the appeal scheme should be focused on locations which are or can be made sustainable through limiting the need to travel and offering a genuine choice of transport modes. It's important to recognise that this paragraph does not require any specific modal split or an impossibly high proportion of people using sustainable modes. The scheme needs to limit the need to travel and offer a, quote, genuine choice of modes. The paragraph also accepts that some sites might not currently be sustainable, but can be made so. And then paragraph 115, the requirements are set out to 237. In relation to the bus provision, the appeal scheme will provide new public bus services, i.e. accessible to all, not just to those visiting the site, linking the appeal site to Bourne End and Marlow, as well as to both High Wycombe, with regular trains to and from London Marylebone, and Maidenhead, from which the Elizabeth Line to from London can be accessed. This is agreed with the Council to be a benefit attracting significant weight, and Mr. Tester had no criticisms of it. It is undoubtedly a major feature in the overall package supporting the proposed modal shift and the sustainability of the appeal scheme. It will support a wider modal shift among the local population, not just among those going to from the film studios. One only needs to read the effusive praise of the appeal scheme by Carousel, the company who will operate the bus services, to realise what a game-changing offer this is. Full details of the provision are set out in the evidence of Mr. Dix. It's clear from that evidence that the bus will be prioritised as a genuine choice, as opposed to the offer being tokenistic. For those visitors not able to secure a parking space or unable to afford a car, the bus will be a wholly reasonable and attractive alternative. Train. Marlow benefits from a train station which is walking distance from the appeal site. Although the service to and from Maidenhead is limited, it remains a relevant feature supporting the overall sustainability of the location. The proposed bus services provide connections to both Elizabeth Line at Maidenhead and the train services at High Wycombe, and as acknowledged by the Council's bus service improvement plan, having a good interchange between bus and train services encourages the use of bus services. Walking and cycling. The majority of Marlow, a significant town with a wide range of services and facilities, is within a 15-minute walking distance of the appeal site, and the whole of the town is within cycling distance. There is no doubt that the Westhorpe interchange is not presently an attractive proposition for pedestrians and cyclists, and the Volvo Bridge is not DDA compliant and can only be used by cyclists able and willing to carry their bikes up and down the stairs on either side. But that is why the appellant will improve both routes. In relation to the Westhorpe interchange, the details of the improvements are set out in Mr. Dix's proof, which include widening the cycling and pedestrian route and protection from the embankment. The adequacy of the design of the pedestrian and cycle facilities are a point of dispute between Mr. Dix and Mr. Tester, albeit they are agreed by National Highways. The key issue depends on whether it is adequate for the pedestrian and cycling route across the interchange to be a 3-metre wide shared route rather than a segregated route. And for the reasons Mr. Dix has given, i.e. short section, limited numbers of pedestrians and cyclists, which also accord with Mr. Tester's final consultation response on the application, a shared route is acceptable. The reality is that on-site physical constraints preclude anything else. As to the Volvo bridge replacement, Mr. Tester considers it would be neither safe, nor suitable, nor attractive to use. However, he accepted that overall it would be an improvement on the existing position by reason of it being DDA compliant. As Mr. Dix explained, while it increases the walking distance, most reasonable people would understand that they were walking a little bit further in order for everyone to be able to use it, and would accept this. The future vegetation proposed finds a balance between protecting residents from visual impacts and overlooking issues, and the lighting is a matter that can be agreed in due course. There will also be significant cycling and pedestrian improvements on the appeal site itself, in addition to the east of the site and between the A404 and Marlow. Overall, the appellant submits that the appeal site is in a sustainable location for the purposes of MPPF paragraph 155C and complies with all relevant policies for sustainable transport. In short, the scheme will provide a genuine choice as to non-car modes. There can therefore be every expectation that the modal shift in the travel plan can be achieved. And then finally, in relation to internal site layout, safety, reason for refusal 6 is predicated on the surprising suggestion that the appellant's world-leading architects and master planners who drew upon expertise in film studio development would design a scheme that jeopardized the safety of those working or visiting the scheme during operation. As became clear during oral evidence, Mr. Tester's case for this reason for refusal reduced solely to a concern about HGVs reversing on 4 cul-de-sacs in the northeastern corner of the scheme. As Mr. Dix explained, this concern is entirely unwarranted. The HGV numbers will be low, the site will be a highly regulated and managed environment. The risks associated with such manoeuvres will be easily managed by those with relevant expertise. In any event, to give the inspector extra comfort, a site management plan is to be secured by planning condition, which can regulate such matters via the use of banksmen, temporary road closures, etc. The film studios would operate in line with HSE good practice guidance to ensure that no conflicts occur. I'll hand back now to Mr. White.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fraser. Ma'am, I'm going to take, as I've said previously, we're going to take the residential amenity section as read, if you're okay with that, and we're also going to deal with other matters. So could I ask you to go to paragraph 274? And there we're going to deal with the planning balance, and the nature of the planning balance will be determined by you whether you consider the scheme is inappropriate development or not. The Rule 6 parties have accepted they don't put forward a planning balance. This is therefore a matter between the council and the appellant in evidence. If the inspector agrees with us, if you do, that the scheme would not be inappropriate, then of course, as we've said, the very special circumstances test doesn't apply, and the appellant does not need to show that the harms are clearly outweighed by other considerations. The Greenbelt harm would not be given substantial weight, and we say the scheme would comply with policy DM42. If you consider the scheme is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, then of course you have to give substantial weight to the Greenbelt harm, and the very special circumstances test applies. Even so, we consider that the harms should be clearly outweighed by the benefits. On the harm side, there is only the harm to greenbelt openness, limited conflict with greenbelt purposes, as we set out previously, the definitional harm to the greenbelt, the localized character and appearance impacts, and any limited weight given to any identified conflict with reason of refusal 4. On the benefits side, the case we say is overwhelmingly strong for the reasons we set out. Substantial weight to be given to the need for new studio space, substantial weight to the economic benefits. Added to this are the significant social benefits, the new public open space, the cycle and pedestrian upgrades, the new bus services, the congestion safety improvements at Westthorpe Interchange, the Culture and Skills Academy, the community building. Finally, there's also the significant environmental benefits, particularly the 20% biodiversity net gain, to which the Council agrees significant weight should be attached, and the ecological improvements. Mr. Fannin, as you'll recall, last Thursday completely lost his bearings, we say, in relation to the weighting he attributed to the planning harms and the benefits. He changed his evidence repeatedly on those matters, seeking to introduce an invisible gloss on his weighting when on the same level, which was utterly mysterious and impossible to decipher. Additionally, he sought to amalgamate benefits without justification. We say, therefore, the only credible and frankly untouched planning balance before this inquiry now is that of Mr. Sensical. Mr. Fannin agreed that the very special circumstances test does not contain any express requirement to show that there are no alternative sites for the development outside of the Greenbelt. In any event, the appellant has prepared such an assessment, and the locational advantages of the appeal site and the critical mass and economies of scale of the scheme have been fully aired above. In either case, whether appropriate or very special circumstance, we argue that applying section 38(6) of the 2004 Act, we comply with DM 42 and with the development plan taken as a whole. For the audit of the relevant policies in section 9 of Mr. Sensicle's proof, which pulls together all of the analysis. Insofar there are other material considerations not picked up already through assessing the scheme and the development plan, they only serve to reinforce the case in favour of granting permission. In the alternative, insofar as you find the scheme as being in conflict with the development plan, for example, there being no support for creative industries development or due to conflict with policy RUR4, we argue that for the purposes of MPPF, Para 11D, the most important policies are out of date, thus triggering an appraisal against both limbs of Para 11D, each of which is passed by the scheme. The argument that the most important policies are out of date is twofold. Firstly, we of course say, as Mr. Sensicle did, that the local plan fails to make provision for the matters set out in Paras 85 of 87 of the MPPF regarding support for creative industries. While Mr. Fannin tried to argue the local plan does do this by reliance on the generic employment policies in CP2 and particularly CP5, this is not a credible position to take. The MPPF requirements are far more specific than this. If the Council takes this approach and their long-awaited and significantly delayed new local plan, the policies will not be found sound. The Council also relied in vain on local strategies, which are not development plan policy. Ironically, the Council also emphasised their support they'd given for Pinewood's expansion, despite them having fully resisted that expansion by refusing permission in May 2013, thereby necessitating an appeal, during which the Council fully resisted the scheme led by Mr. Bird. It is only the Secretary of State who granted permission for that expansion. Second, as explained above, policy RUR4 is also out of date on account of the country park aspiration for the whole area of land being undeliverable due to the Council having insufficient land interests. Therefore, applying the MPPF 11DI, there are no footnote 7 policies in the MPPF that provide a strong reason to refuse permission. Most significantly, the scheme is either appropriate development in the Greenbelt, alternatively benefits from very special circumstances, and therefore the Greenbelt policies provide no such strong reason for refusal. Applying MPPF Para 11D2 is merely a formality. If the scheme is either appropriate development or supported by very special circumstances, it would follow as a matter of course that the tilt of balance would weigh heavily in favour of granting permission. Therefore, overall, Mr. Sensicle explained that refusing permission for this scheme would send a very strange message, given all of the government's recent emphasis on driving the growth of the creative sector. It would be a missed opportunity to capture a bigger share of the global market for film and high-end TV production on a site which is sustainable and in the grey belt. We say the case in favour of the scheme is compelling. So in conclusion, ma'am, We acknowledge and accept from your perspective that courage is needed to make the right decision, and it's needed also outside this inquiry in life. Courage and bravery are needed in all walks of life, but never more than now in the planning system. It's become frozen because the now institutional response, frankly, for most LPAs is to negatively and repeatedly say no. The young and the optimistic are those who suffer repeatedly with the loss of the provision of housing, the loss of employment opportunities, and frankly, the loss of hope. We ask you to take a completely opposite path. Play your part in giving hope, activating hope, and allowing hope. This proposal is so special, so unique, so transformative, and so enriching, it really should be allowed. Mr. Sensical was stark in his examination in chief. If permission is refused, it will take many years to find, develop, and get a planning permission for another site. All the benefits will be lost for many years, if not forever. In contrast, a permission will allow the most incredible series of benefits, which will be transformative for the county, the region, and the country. Therefore, Ma'am, in reaching your conclusion on this matter, we ask you to recommend the grant of consent and ensure that many thousands of people and their families will benefit from the employment that will be offered here. Many thousands and their families will benefit from the construction jobs that will be offered here. Many thousands and their families will benefit from the skills they will learn on site and enhance those skills here. Many thousands will come to Marlow Film Studios to make films and television which create dreams. Many thousands will benefit from a town and a county that will be enriched both culturally and financially by having a jewel in the crown in its midst, creating excellence in a wonderful environment in the most incredible development. Many thousands will visit Marlow to see how special this development is. Therefore, for those reasons and the rest of the closing submissions, we do ask you, on behalf of the appellant, that we ask you to recommend to the Secretary of State at the conclusion of this inquiry that planning permission is granted for this appeal scheme. And Ma'am, you will take your time on the appendices. I won't go through them now as they largely reflect what we put before you in opening. For those reasons, therefore, that's the closing submissions of the appellant, unless I can help you in any other way or Mr. Fraser can.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for your closings. Okay, that was a day. I
Madam,
just got a couple, sorry.
Could I just raise one factual point, just to correct it, because it's important that it corrected. In 208, paragraph 286.1 of the appellant's closing, which Mr. White has just read out, he referred to a decision by the council in 2013 resisting the Pinewood appeal. That has nothing to do with the 600,000 square foot expansion, which was approved by Buckinghamshire Council. That was an earlier decision by South Bucks District Council in 2013.
Okay, noted. Thank you. Mr. White, any comments?
I don't accept there's anything in 286 which is factually incorrect, frankly, but well, there just isn't. The fact is that council, which Mr. Bird represented, refused, and their role and status has been inherited by Mr. Bird's current clients. I mean, he can look like that, but that's factually true.
Understood. Thank you. Right. Okay. There's a couple of emails coming, which are the updates for the need evidence, removing the links and putting in the PDFs. I presume they're just going to insert into the core documents, are they? Or I'm getting a nod. I'm presuming that's going to happen. So if the council,
I believe they're added to the ID document.
they've gone in as IDs, not as
The
core docs.
need docs have gone in as ID docs, I believe.
Right, that's right. It's just I've just had a few come through this afternoon, so I just wanted to know where they were. So ID docs. Okay, thank you.
Ma'am,
Right,
is it worth you? Can I just raise one administrative point, and it might be that you've already reached your own agreement with the council, and Mr. Bird might have a view, but can we just make sure, obviously, the web page remains intact, frankly, because sometimes it goes, and it might assist you if you ever want to check on something that you might need, you might be dependent on it. So I don't know whether you've raised this with the council independently.
I haven't, but I was assuming it would remain open at least until the Secretary of State's issued their decision and for 6 weeks following that, in case of any challenge period.
That's a very, very fair assumption. I've just had an experience where a website was taken down prior to the inspector reaching their decision, which obviously caused problems. So that's the only reason I raised it. I'm sure that won't happen here, but it's just worth reiterating the importance of its retention.
I don't have any instructions on that. I don't know whether Harvey is listening at the moment, or anybody else from the council can confirm what the factual position is in terms of the website. I assume, as you have, Madam, that it would stay in place until after the Secretary of State decision.
It absolutely will. Nobody takes anything off of the website until I give the say-so. So it will stay on there until after the decision's been issued and for 6 weeks after to allow for any responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Harvey.
And obviously, if there is a challenge, Harvey, then it will need to stay live until that challenge is
Absolutely.
settled. So, okay, thank you. Hopefully there won't be a challenge. Anyway, ever hopeful. So I would say that concludes all the evidence, and thank you all for your efforts. It's been a bit of a marathon of an inquiry. So it is appreciated, as are your closings. They will be coming very helpful when I come to write the recommendation. So it's now time for me to close the inquiry and say goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mum. Bye.
Thank you.